Commissioners.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to see right now if we have a quorum. I think that we have 6 out of 7 to make a quorum. So we can wait one more if you would like.
Yeah, we'll wait a minute and see if we can get 7.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, yes, with Commissioner Sullinger. Yes, you have 7.
Okay, great. All right, I'd like then to call the meeting to order for our commission meeting for the month of September. I will be filling in for our chair, Sir Camp, and hope that we can get through this meeting in a credible manner.
We will. You will. You will.
All right, and as far as my remarks, I just give a quick overview of what we hope to accomplish today. We have just some brief administrative things to start us off this morning, and then we will move into the operation and budget reports from our distinguished guests, and the commissioners will have an opportunity to ask questions, I think, during that part of the session. That will carry us till about 12:45 approximately. We'll take a break there and then finish up at 1:15 with some brief administrative issues. That's pretty much all I had. I was going to ask the secretary, do you have any comments or remarks for this morning?
Just a quick update for the commission. We did receive notice yesterday that Stratford University, which operates a campus in Baltimore City, it's only one in Maryland, and it has 3 campuses in Virginia. And we, about 6 months ago, got a heads up that they might be closing, but it wasn't planned until spring of 23. They've announced closure of all their campuses due to a change at the U.S. Department of Education in terms of accreditation of the board that accredited them. So we are working very diligently from the legal side as well as the academic program side to obtain student records, student count, all the things necessary. We have 3 campuses so far, 3 other campuses that are willing. We'll talk about a teach-out agreement. It looks like the majority of the current students, which are 58 in Maryland, yet to be confirmed, are culinary arts, and maybe 10 students in other fields. So we will be, of course, working with institutions on teach-outs and claiming the bond, which, as a matter of fact, has an end date of tomorrow. So Emily and Jennifer Katz have been working on that to actually have a live presentation at the bank today to draw down the bonds to protect the students from tuition reimbursement. So unless there are any questions on that, that'd be the only update I have. Other than our HR, we continue to move forward with the hiring and placement of new staff for the academic program units and in OSPA. So with that, I'll back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretary Fielder, for those comments. Our next item would be public comments. There are no public comments for this particular month, so we can move ahead. The next item on the agenda is to approve our minutes from our August 24th meeting. Hopefully the commissioners have received those minutes by mail and had a chance to look them over. And if so, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes from August.
Commissioner Boyd, I so approve.
Thank you.
Commissioner Salmon seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Salmon. So the minutes have been motion to approve and second. Is there any discussion at this time? If not, all in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right. The minutes from August are now approved. Thank you very much. And now we're going to get into the heart of our meeting for today. We will have presentations from a number of guests this morning on operational and capital budget issues. And to guide us through, I'll ask Mr. Jeff Newman if he'll kind of take control and guide us through this section of the meeting. Mr. Newman?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We are going to hear from each segment of higher education for their operating and capital budget goals for fiscal 2024, which we are now preparing to get ready for. So not to delay, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Ellen Herbst, Senior Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance, and Dr. Joanne Bothman, Senior Vice Chancellor of Academic and Student Affairs from the University System of Maryland.
Mr. Newman, before we get started, if commissioners have questions, will we ask questions at the end of each presentation or during? How do you think that should work?
Yeah, I'm hoping that everyone left a couple minutes for questions and answers. I did ask them to try to do that when I sent the information out on the meeting. So right at the end of each person's presentation, please ask your questions.
Thank you.
Yep.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you to the commissioners, Secretary Fielder, and all of our colleagues on this call. This is a great opportunity once a year for all the elements of higher ed in the state to interact with all the commissioners. We appreciate it. I wanted to introduce the other two colleagues from the University System of Maryland who are on this call before we got started. We have Colleen Allberger, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Budget. She joined us in January. And has many years of experience at the flagship as well as previous experiences in other part of the system. And then Chad Muntz, who's our Assistant Vice Chancellor for Institutional Research, Data and Analytics. His team does a lot of work, not just on the reporting requirements, but on original research around particularly enrollment trends. And of course, my dear colleague, Dr. Joanne Bothman. Jo has been a Senior Vice Chancellor at the system for 10 years, and prior to that, she was the Executive Vice President at the American Society of Human Genetics, as well as various leadership positions at UMB. Maybe most importantly for this meeting, she was also a commissioner at NHEC for 11 years, at various times serving as the Education Committee head and the Vice Chair. It's my sad duty to let you know that Jo has announced she is retiring at the end of the year. And as much as we have begged and pleaded with her, she stood firm that she is indeed retiring. She's truly been a major leader in higher education and has made so many contributions to the state of Maryland. We'll never be able to adequately thank her for all her service to the state, but we will certainly try. And I'd ask all of you to join me in thanking Jo for all her many years of service to the state. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
Okay, if we could go to the next slide. You'll hear me talking a bit about our new strategic plan, and we've organized the first part of this presentation around the pillars of our new strategic plan, which of course aligns with the state plan, and we'll make that connection between the two plans as we go. So if you could go to the next slide. One of our key pillars in both the state plan and the system plan is our support of and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The system is already a majority-minority system with 60% of our undergrads and graduates identifying as racial or ethnic minority. And in our new strategic plan, we call out a couple of goals which are not new, but we wanted to highlight them around our commitment. One is to raise the profile of the 3 HBCUs out of the 4 in the state that are part of the system. They are putting together their plans and starting to execute their plans for enrollment management and student success. And we're grateful to the state for the additional support that those universities are receiving. Jo's organization is also working to increase ways to integrate civic education into the general education curricula. and also to implement new programs around an ethos of committed public engagement, all in support of the idea that we're not only educating students for their future careers, but we're educating future citizens. Next slide. We've had as one of our main strategic pillars for years, access, affordability, and achievement, and we continue with that commitment. Just a couple of facts to ground us all. We have 165,000 students enrolled, and that accounts for about 72% of the total enrollment in Maryland's four-year degree granting institutions. We award about 43,000 degrees annually, which account for about 80% of all the bachelor degrees awarded in the state every year, 53% of all the master's degrees, 55% of all the doctoral degrees, and 83% of all the professional degrees. And this is per, and I'm going to be sharing some information that is per the FY21 USM Economic Impact Report, which was done by the Jacob Franz Institute. I know a lot of people are tracking where everyone in higher ed is as we come out of the pandemic. I will tell you our update for fall 22, we haven't finalized it yet, but what we see so far is enrollment genius nature of the universities in the system and the different cohorts we all serve. Enrollment is slightly up at some universities, slightly down at other universities, stable at other universities. And what we've seen coming out of the pandemic, of course, we know that many students delayed their entry into higher education as a result of the pandemic. But we're seeing freshman cohorts rebound. In fact, we've seen some record numbers in some of our freshman cohorts, and we're welcoming more students. We're also seeing the in-state, out-of-state mix continue to rebalance coming out of the pandemic. And in fact, graduate enrollment from foreign countries has already rebounded. So that 43,000 degrees includes about 28,000 bachelor's degrees, which comports with our commitment to the state's plan. And I wanted to take a moment to point out that that same Jacob Franz study showed that a bachelor's degree, someone earning a bachelor's degree can expect to earn between 2.5 and 3.2 million in incremental earnings over their lifetime versus not having a bachelor's degree. I think that's important as you listen to all of us today, because public education in Maryland is affordable. Many people do graduate with no student loans or any ongoing financial assistance. And for those that do require loans, we strive, and we do so with the state's enormous support, we strive to keep debt to an affordable level in terms of repayment after graduation. And the average debt for an in-state bachelor degree recipient at the system is $30,000. So why do I say this? We say this to point out that not only does the individual earn more wages, but this helps the state attract employers who need access to highly educated workforce. And therefore, both the employers and the employees contribute to the tax base. So my main point here is that the university system, along with all of our sister organizations represented here today, is not an expense for the state, it's an investment in the state. Next slide. Okay, here we go. Thank you. No, I'm sorry. Go back to that previous slide. Thank you. Another pillar of our strategies is excellence and innovation. Just a few more numbers for you. I mentioned that 28,000 bachelor degrees we achieve is both our target from the 2010 system plan, but also the state MHEC target plan. We have a 71% graduation 6-year rate. This is 1% below our all-time high, but it remains significantly higher than the national average, which is 62%, based on the National Center for Education Statistics. Our retention is at 86%, which is again 1% lower than our highest rate. So in total, when we track all of our new students, whether they be freshmen, Maryland Community College transfers, other transfers, spring students, all up, all in. We have a success rate of over 60% who, when they start with us, they'll earn a degree from the system. Keep going. Next slide, please. Another area, obviously, that we contribute to is both the workforce and economic development. Digging a little deeper on our graduates, the 12,000 degrees in STEM fields is about 82% of all the baccalaureate level STEM degrees generated in the state. And of course, all of us help contribute to Maryland's top ranking in quality of our science and engineering workforce. Other high need workforce areas such as education and healthcare, the USM system schools produce about 79% of all education degrees awarded in Maryland and 81% of health degrees. And you can see there, which I'll get to in a minute, the number of new companies created. But I wanted to pause on the issue of teachers for a minute. And this is something I know everybody on this call doesn't need to hear from me, but I wanted to give you a few more pieces of information. The state of Maryland depends on importing teachers or recent graduates from out-of-state colleges. Maryland does not produce enough teachers annually to keep up with openings on our own. If we see decreases in teacher education programs in other states, we will therefore see decreases in the inflow of teachers into Maryland. Another key strategic concern is the fact that the teachers our system does produce are Marylanders. And why is that an important point? We are not getting out-of-state students to come into our teaching programs in the system. What that means is if we see a decreased rate of college participation by Maryland high school students in the future, it would have a knock-on effect of likely decreasing teacher production coming out of higher ed. So I know that's something that you all focus on, and I'm sure that'll be the subject of some discussion. But I wanted to provide those facts for you. Finally, I wanted to turn to research and economic impact from our research and technology. The basic and applied research coming out of USM institutions typically results in more than 300 invention disclosures filed annually, almost 200 new patents awarded each year. And since 2011, we have either facilitated or directly created over 600 new companies coming out of the system. Next slide, please. And then finally, I will just point out that the $1.4 billion in R&D that we attract annually contributes to a vital role in supporting the state's economy and certainly enhances our national and international reputation. And we're so pleased to again note that the combination of the flagship University of Maryland at College Park and University of Maryland Baltimore together retain their top 10 National Science Foundation research ranking among all public universities across the country. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the strategic plan, and we just organized what we just told you around our pillars, but a couple of other threads that run through our plan that I thought was important to share. One is, and you'll see this throughout, and I believe I don't know if the commissioners did receive a copy of our plan with the materials, but both our full plan and our executive summary are available on our website. And we'll be happy to answer any questions as a follow-on around that. But one of the threads that is probably the most significant running through our strategic plan is the idea that over the next 10 years, we will continue to shift to outcomes for students, and not just students, but learners of all kinds. And so you see this shift from program or institution focused to student-centric and concentrating on learner outcomes. And the distinction there, the significance there, is we will continue and expand our focus on working adults in terms of upskilling and reskilling working adults coming back for additional higher education. I'd like to spend a minute or two to just connect all of that back to the state's plan, as we were asked to do. Next slide. So these points directly address points in the state plan. I won't read them to you. They're up on the screen, but I'll highlight a couple of things. One, I again want to emphasize, when we talk to our colleagues around the country, one of the things that comes out in almost every conversation is envy on their part. Envy that we're in higher education in Maryland, because it is known throughout the country that Maryland historically has understood the tremendous value of higher education to the state's economy and has backed that up with generous support in state funds. And we see that again in this past year's appropriations. We saw an increase of $20 million in financial aid for need-based students, as well as, of course, the flow of monies coming from the HBCU settlement, which is going to enable our HBCUs across the state to offer additional programs, offer expanded programs, help market better across the country, and help students. Next slide, please. The 55% goal, which is the state's plan's goal, is our North Star. We always refer back to and connect back to that, and our contribution to it being the 28,000 degrees awarded. We are working on advanced technology to improve student success, transfer with success, transferring with less friction, getting students from community college to one of our institutions and through is one of the big centerpieces of the work that we have been doing and will continue to expand on. And of course, we've been working for years and also intend to expand on non-degree credentials and putting the work in to develop standards around them so that when someone presents a certificate or other credential, that an employer understands it's got weight behind it and we can explain what's really in there. Next slide, please. Student health and wellness remains our top priority. You'll see that again when you look at where our capital budget goes. It's our #1 priority. Certainly the pandemic presented lessons for all of us, and I want you to know that those lessons have been incorporated going forward. Things like circulation inside buildings and around a campus, airflow, even more important. These are all things that are being incorporated into the building standards going forward and the renovation standards going forward. Another lesson learned is we do better when we work together. I think if you asked anybody in the system at a leadership level, one of the things the pandemic did for us in a positive way is bring us together even more than we already were, and we have more collaboration now than ever. And of course, a lot going on around communication, education, and prevention of both physical and mental issues. If we could move on, now we're going to get to the numbers. So we wanted to present to you 2 charts, this one and the next one, that grounds you in the total budget and explains the sources and then the uses of our funding. So this chart is about where the money comes from for the university system in total. Coming out of the FY23 budget, we're at $6.8 billion in total for the 12 universities and 3 regional centers. And it's interesting to me, as somebody who is grounded in numbers, how evenly distributed our sources of funds are. And what I mean by that is if you start in the upper left-hand quadrant, you'll see that what we call here general funds and the higher education fund source, in other words, state appropriations, represent about 28% of that $6.8 billion. What many people don't know, though, is that tuitions and fees represent about the same amount of money, about 27%. And another 27% are what's shown here as restricted funds. Think grants, contracts, funds we get in for a very, very specific purpose. And then auxiliary services, here you can think about residence hall, dining services, and other things like that, along with everything else, if you will, represents about an 18%. So very balanced in terms of the funding sources. Next slide, please. So where does all that money go? Well, I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone that the single largest expenditure category is salary, wages, and benefits for our employees. And on the next slide, which we'll get to in a minute, if you can go back, you'll see the number of employees we have. Obviously, higher ed is a sector where our value is what's in between people's ears. So the fact that salaries and benefits is such a large portion of our expenditures should not be a surprise. The next biggest category is all other kind of services needed to deliver education, housing, and dining for our students. This does include dining services, housekeeping, maintenance services, etc. Student aid represents about 10%. This is federal, state, institutional aid, scholarships, fellowships, tuition remission. This is all in about 10%. And we'll talk about the institutional aid component of that. That is the part that the system provides in a minute. And then, if you will, all other, which is everything else you can think of. Okay, next slide, please. All right, to help understand some of those numbers here on one chart is kind of some key numbers. So out of that 6.8 billion, you see here the legislative appropriation of 1.7 billion. That tuition and fees, which was the next category of funding sources, we keep track intensely on where we rank in terms of affordability against all other states. What this says is we're in the kind of middle of the pack in terms of affordability for tuition and fees. Now, we've been there now for several years. We did not rank nearly so well if you look back 8, 9, 10 years ago. The partnership with the state, the generous support of the state in appropriation has been what has allowed us to keep tuition either stable, and we certainly kept it flat during the pandemic, or relatively small increases. It's no more than 2% for in-state undergrads in any given year. And that, coupled with the fact that Maryland residents have the highest per capita income in the country, we think makes Maryland a very good deal for Maryland citizens. And then you see our enrollment, both headcount, but also full-time equivalents, and then the number of positions we've had. Next slide, please. Okay. What are our priorities going into this new budget year? We're going to continue and double down on the need for additional financial aid to continue to make progress in terms of equitable access and affordability to our universities. So as we think about our highest priorities going into the budget year, that stands out for us. And in particular, of course, in-state students, but also increasing aid for transfer students and folks coming in and out of the Regional Higher Education Center. We also want to support those working adults who are coming back to us to reskill and upskill to meet the changing workforce needs. We're also interested in funding that will help us continue to innovate the way we both deliver education, but also how we innovate the student's experience. And one area here, for instance, is making it easier for transfer students to understand what they need to do to transfer successfully from community college or from other places into our system. There are a number of things we're doing in the area of technology, but also intervention techniques to improve student outcomes once they're with us. And then we are also wanting to invest in the actual program support and the data analytics that are necessary to improve outcomes. So those are our top areas on the operating budget for the coming year. If we have time, Jeff, I'm doing okay on time. We can talk a bit about capital, just a few more slides, I promise. If we go to
you're doing fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we were also asked to talk about our capital support, the funding necessary to keep all of our physical assets in good repair. And I say that deliberately. The Board of Regents of the University System of Maryland for years has made it clear that their top priority in capital spending is to refurbish, renew, retain existing investment. Of course, we recognize that new investment is sometimes required, especially in areas of new technology for STEM and other areas that just require facilities that you can't renovate your way into, you have to build your way into. But you'll see on coming slides that the board's policy of focusing on renovation and renewal is really paying off in what we're spending our money on. The state support is incredibly important. We couldn't function without it, to be quite frank. We've seen a historic year of capital funding for all higher ed, and the system is no exception to that, and we're grateful for that. But it needs to continue. That investment in facilities has both short and long-term benefit to the state. The short term is obviously any capital expenditures for construction activity itself has an immediate direct economic benefit that helps sustain the state's economy. If we can go to the next slide. I find this slide very valuable. Now, what you're looking at along the bottom are the initials for each one of the universities in the system. So you can see each of the abbreviations. Along the side, what you're seeing is gross square footage. So in other words, the top of the scale is 4.5 million gross square feet. And that has to do with the amount of space on each one of our campuses. The yellow bar is the amount of square footage that is 25 years old or less, based on either when it was built or when it last had a major renovation. The red bar is square footage that is older than 25 years. And somebody went, and that's the right response. Not surprisingly, our flagship, which we call the University of Maryland College Park, has the biggest bars in total. Not sure if it's a surprise or not that it also has the most square footage that is old. And when you see those red bars, think old. Old in terms of facilities. Doesn't mean they're not functional, but it's an indication to us of the amount of ongoing facilities renewal and renovation we have to fund. And this chart is one we look at every year when we're looking at facilities renewal. I mentioned the board policy. We have a board policy that encourages each campus to spend 2% of the replacement value of their assets every year on maintenance and renewal. Now, we don't necessarily meet that goal, but the pressure on all of us to invest in renewal of our assets, in addition to whatever the state is giving us for capital, is intense. And I think if you talk to any of our presidents, they would tell you that. Next slide, please. Here's a different way to think about our capital needs. Now we're looking at a pie chart of the capital budget in total. And the red, which is the 75% of the pie chart, is where it represents the dollars we have asked for in the areas of renovation, replacement, but not full build, and deferred maintenance. And this is based on the 5-year governor's capital program improvement program. And for us, that 5 years is $1.36 billion. The yellow, 25% of the pie, is what represents our investment and what we need as new facilities, new areas. This might not be a whole new building. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. That is designed to support technology, teaching, research that can't be done in existing facilities, no matter how much we renovate them. And then lastly, what do we think about, and what, if you could go to the next slide. These are the things that are always on our mind when we're thinking about capital. I mentioned earlier, student safe and health remain our top priority. Those projects always are at the top of our list, whether it's for facilities renewal during the year or for construction. I will tell you, we are seeing historic cost escalations. Especially in skilled trades. We just got some new information that was showing double digits in the 20% plus inflation escalators in certain key construction material categories. So we're thinking this cost escalation is not going away anytime soon. And even in the cases where we've procured materials, we're finding it difficult, as is everybody across the country, to secure the necessary skilled trades to continue with construction on schedule. So we spend a lot of time working with our construction management service centers trying to mitigate those two areas. We'll continue in the future to focus on maintenance and repair, doing things that will enhance the flexibility of our use of spaces, and expanding the research and healthcare programs. And our Regent's request is consistent with those priorities. I want to thank you all for letting me drone on like this, and hopefully have provided you with some valuable information for your consideration. Thank you.
Would Dr. Boffman like to say a few words for the final time with this collected audience?
I would like to say a thank you, not just to my colleagues at USM, but to the Maryland Higher Education Commission for their very, very steady support for the system and in general. And I would just also like to thank our other colleagues in higher education, especially right now as we focus on transfer across the state, but in many other kinds of collaborations that we do. I think the system tends to be envied by other systems, if you will, but the state as a whole in higher education is, and it's been wonderful to be a part of that. Thank you, Jeff.
Are there any questions of the University System of Maryland?
Jeff, Jim Fielder here. I don't have a question. I have a statement in congratulating Dr. Bachman on the tremendous efforts over the years, the consistency and the confidence that you've instilled not only for the system, but also because of the system for all our campuses and all our institutions in the state, and what you've done to lift students that needed to be lifted. I thank you very, very much for that. The commission is better for your presence on it in the past, but also your continued professionalism. Just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Anything else from anyone?
Jeff, I did have a quick question.
Sure.
During the presentation, it was mentioned briefly about the effects of the pandemic on enrollment and even some of the healthcare needs of students there. Is it too early to make a comment about the pandemic influence on academics? I've read, how students sometimes really suffered academically. Have you seen any trends where they need more remedial work or anything like that as a result of what they experienced over the last year or two?
Dr. Boffman, take it
Yes,
away.
I can try to go with that one. Yes, indeed, we do see not only academic support services, especially in different various kinds of tutoring and so on, but especially in our wraparound general support services for our students and their mental health. The level of anxiety among students at this point in time is high. We have much more suicidal ideation going on in higher education. And so our student affairs and health centers and counseling centers have been working very hard to support those students. I would tell you that we also are concerned about the future, if you will, and are looking down the road because we are concerned about the students who have lost so much time in high school and even junior high school, and what we will be facing in developmental courses in the future. And I, for one, am very concerned about those kids who were in 3rd and 4th grade and missed a lot of basic math, especially in those grades. But the other thing that I would reemphasize is the social skills. that we, in fact, are working very hard to engage our students in. And I think in the community colleges, they would comment on the same thing. We have a lot of makeup work to do, but we are focused on that. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that response.
Anything else for the system?
Jeff, I have one small
Okay.
question, sort of
All right.
piggybacks a little bit where Commissioner McDaniels was. I was intrigued by your mentioning the in-state and out-of-state enrollment decline. And I may have missed it, but I wanted to understand, is one greater than the other? And then secondly, given the magnificence of this report you've given us, what are some of your thoughts as to what's going on with that?
Chad can probably answer the first question about differing rates of in-state versus out-of-state. We've been watching carefully the enrollment trends at the Maryland community colleges, since that's a very large feeder for us, obviously, and transfer students are an enormous part of our student bodies. And of course, and I'm sure our colleagues in the community college system will talk about this, both before the pandemic, but certainly within the pandemic, we saw a significant decline in community college enrollments. For 2 years, maybe, I would say 1920, we weren't seeing so much the impacts of that. If, for instance, if there was a 13% decline overall in community college enrollment, we were seeing maybe a 5% decline in the number of transfer students coming to us. I think this past year, we've seen a larger percentage impact of that on community college. On the overall, on the out of state, which of course also includes international, we were already starting to see the impacts of a decline in international based, frankly, on federal policy as much as anything else for several years prior to the pandemic. We're seeing that bounce back, yes, because the pandemic is moved on to being endemic, but also because I think the policies they're seeing in this country are more supportive of them going to school here. And Chad, I'll pause for a minute. I do want to address the larger question of trends, because we see multiple disruptive trends already impacting higher ed, and we expect them to expand and accelerate. But Chad, did you want to comment specifically on the enrollment trends?
Sure. Just, I mean, specifically I think Ellen had exactly right, that during the pandemic, with people not traveling, we saw a decrease in especially our foreign students who were coming to the U.S., as well as just students staying locally or not going at all to college. But it looks like some of those numbers have returned, and as things have opened up and COVID has become more of an endemic, as mentioned.
So on the front of kind of larger trends, we've got demographic trends, and I think everybody here knows about the national change in high school graduation in terms of the numbers nationally. We're actually tracking it regionally and statewide. And in fact, Maryland will end up kind of staying in place in terms of total number of students, but the makeup of students, even coming out of the high school senior graduation pool, which for the state of Maryland, about 80%, is it, Chad, go on to some form of higher education out of high school. We track 1 year after high school. So it's important to keep track of our own students, but it's also important to keep track of where we pull students from. So we tend to pull students from the Northeast and lose students to the Southeast. When you look at in Maryland and then who's coming in and out of our state. The Northeast is projected to lose high school graduates at a fairly significant rate. Maryland itself will be stable, but those trends, we're watching very carefully. And then the makeup of the high school graduating class is going to include increasingly students who are more first generation than we've seen in previous years. As the ethnic and racial and kind of immigrant status mix changes in the K through 12 and then through community college, what we're going to be facing is how do we attract and retain students who more and more are first generation. The other issue, big issue, is the value proposition for higher education. There's been an awful lot written in this country, we believe incorrectly, that college is not a good value anymore. We need to do more to get our message out that certainly education, higher education in Maryland is a good value and does yield significantly higher lifetime earnings than if you don't go. And then there are a bunch of other trends, but I'd say those are the ones we're watching very closely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Commissioner Coleman had raised a hand. We have about 30 seconds. If we could wrap this segment up, please. I think you're muted, Commissioner Coleman.
You spoke
Okay.
about the teaching shortage in the state of Maryland. What percentage of the teachers are in this Teach America program that actually teach in the state of Maryland?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know, Joe, if you do. Or
No,
Jeff.
I don't have an exact proportion. We in fact do have some additional capacity in our teacher preparation programs, and they are growing. But in fact, here in Maryland, there are several other alternative pathways for licensing teachers that are being utilized to in fact make sure that we have a sufficient number of teachers. One of the major things that we are focusing on now, which we hope will be very fruitful, is working with people who are already working in the school systems, either paraprofessional, teacher aides, other people working in the school systems who have devoted their lives to children, but now getting them into teacher preparation programs so that we can get them appropriately certified so that they can be classroom teachers of record. That's one of the areas that we're really focusing on.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, well, I would like to thank Vice Chancellor, Senior Vice Chancellor Herbst and Dr. Boffman. And I'd also like to thank Chad Muntz and Colleen Auberger for being available. We will now move on to St. Mary's College of Maryland. And we have Dr. Catherine Gantz, the Interim Provost and Dean of Faculty. Dr. Gantz?
Good morning. Good morning to Secretary Fielder, to commissioners, and to our distinguished colleagues. Again, I'm Dr. Catherine Gantz, and our president, Wanda Jordan, regrets that she can't be here today, but our Chief Financial Officer, Paul Pusiker, the Vice Chair of our Board of Trustees, Paula Collins, and I are pleased to be here with you. Next slide, please. As the National Public Honors College, St. Mary's College of Maryland aligns with the state plan, both historically and presently, in our ongoing commitment to an accessible and affordable honors education. Next slide. So have you have, of course, seen that we have submitted an extensive detailing of our curricular and programmatic achievements in our 18-page narrative. But for the purposes of our overview here today, we'd like to talk a little bit about the key points. And we'll begin with a bit about St. Mary's by the numbers. So as you'll likely remember, the college has done the difficult and critical work of culling 17 majors and minors that were not well subscribed. And in that same interval, we've been able to add 4 high demand majors. Those are marine science, neuroscience, performing arts, and business administration. The result today is a very intentional and focused program array staffed by 369 full-time employees. Next slide, please. So this might be our favorite slide. We're pleased to report very positive news on the enrollment front. Following the largest application pool in St. Mary's history, we've enrolled the largest entering class in 10 years this fall, following the 3rd straight year of increasing enrollment. All of this is very good news, especially noteworthy in light of the fact that the college has frozen its tuition for the 3rd straight year. Next slide, please. We're honored to have earned a variety of public accolades from places like the Princeton Review, Money Magazine, Lend EDU. Perhaps the most well-known venue is U.S. News and World Report. And in their 2023 rankings, St. Mary's College of Maryland is ranked 6th best public liberal arts college in the nation. And it also ranks 89th in the nation among all liberal arts colleges, public and private. The college is also listed by U.S. News, World Report as a best value school and also a top performer in social public mobility, which is a ranking based on enrolling and graduating large proportions of disadvantaged students awarded with Pell Grants. Next slide, please. So again, returning to the state plan, our mission continues to be equitable access to an affordable and high quality education. So what measures do we use? What kind of resource are we to Maryland students? What support do we provide students of color to receive an inclusive and equitable education? And how do we measure our value against the debt that's accrued by our students? Let's look at the next slide. So certainly, we strive to respond to the higher education needs of the state of Maryland. And as you'll see, we continue to be enrolled. 90% of our student body is from in-state. Next slide, please. Again, more about access. Our ability to recruit and to serve an increasingly diverse student body also really signals our commitment to equitable access. So for the available data, comparing percentages of students of color in the entering class, St. Mary's has kept a pace of our peer institutions and of other schools in our consortium of public liberal arts colleges, or COPAC, and we've outperformed our aspirant institutions. This fall, we're proud to have welcomed the most diverse entering class in St. Mary's history. You'll see that we have not performed as strongly. I'm sorry, go back one slide, thank you. We've not performed as strongly in our enrollment of Pell Grant recipients, and this will be a focus for the college in the coming year. Next slide, please. So hand in hand with accessibility is affordability. And in this regard, we're very well positioned, having the second lowest 3-year average net price among the 10 Maryland liberal arts colleges. Next slide, please. And just as importantly, regarding debt for our students have on average $6,600 less college loan debt than their other Maryland graduate counterparts. And their loan default rate is roughly a quarter of the Maryland average. Next slide. So I'd like to switch a little bit to our LEAD curriculum to return to how we deliver on the state plan. I'll touch briefly on our integrated curriculum, which we call Learning by Experiential and Applied Discovery, or LEAD. Next slide. So we're now in our 3rd year of LEAD. LEAD combines a scaffolded progression of 2 required components and 1 optional component, all of which include embedded professional literacy coursework that is focused on reflection on post-graduation planning. I'll go through this very quickly. Next slide, please. At the foundational level, that encompasses our breadth requirements for our students, and that's either by way of kind of traditional distribution requirements or through theme-based inquiries that involved connected, themed sets of courses. In the first year, from the very first time they enter, there are professional pathway courses that link research skills of academic work with employment exploration. Next slide. And then at the advanced level, students specialize with the major, and they continue to take coursework that's dedicated to professional literacy, but this time within their own discipline. And then finally, next slide. We have what we're calling the Honors College Promise. And the Honors College Promise guarantees that every student, no matter what the major or curriculum that they follow, will have the opportunity to pursue one of 3 transformative experiences with meaningful connections to their own field of study, and that's guided research, an internship, or study abroad. And all of these opportunities continue to build the relevant skills that carry our students into the workforce with confidence. Next slide. So how do we evaluate the impact of the LEAD curriculum? In part, we measure that through the cumulative number of high impact practices that they encounter by time of graduation. Of course, high impact practices are active learning experiences that promote deep learning, student engagement. They're often correlated to higher levels of student performance and retention. You'll see here that 98% of all St. Mary's graduates complete 2 or more high impact practices during their studies. That well surpasses the average of liberal arts colleges nationwide. Next slide. And when you look at how we're delivering, I'm sorry, there we go, great. When you look at how we're delivering high impact practices to individual groups of students, you'll see that students of color and Pell Grant students are just as likely to have experienced 2 or more during their time at St. Mary's. Again, connecting affordable access and equitable access to our education. Next slide. So how else might we track our institutional progress with supporting student success? For us, we focus, of course, on rates of retention and graduation as key indicators. Next slide. So here you'll see on the left, 5-year averages of our first to second year retention rates. Excellent, outpacing our peer institutions, the Maryland private and public institutions. On the right, you'll see the same is true for our 4-year graduation rates. Next slide. And drilling down further in our first year retention rates, we perform quite well, retaining 80% of both students of color and Pell Grant students. We do have challenges in the 4- and 6-year retention rates. Again, this is a focus of ours in the coming year. With that, we'll change direction a bit, and I'd like to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Chief Financial Officer Paul Pusiker.
Thank you, Katie. So first slide, looking at the FY24 budget request for the state funds, requesting $33.8 million, comprised the general fund grant, $31.3, and the higher education investment fund of $2.5 million. To highlight other revenue sources, first I'd like to say that the state support at 33.8 is the highest source of revenue for us at 43%, followed by our tuition and fees at $26.4 million, which is 34% of our total revenue. Then auxiliary enterprises, room, board, bookstore, etc., at $18.8 million, or 24% of our total revenue. On the expense side, our FY24 projected expenses total $77.2 million. And like the system and like many other institutions, our largest contributor to our expense is salaries and benefits, to include contractual payroll. That represents $41.4 million, or 54% of the total operating expense. Followed by operating, which is supply and expense budget at $16 million. That represents 21%. Auxiliary services, $10.5 million, 13%. And financial aid at $9.2 million, or 12% of our total expense budget. Moving on to the capital budget request. Next slide, please. I just want to reinforce that we remain extremely grateful to the state for all operational and budget support. As was said earlier, we could not do it without the support from the state. So looking at the FY24 capital budget request, first, infrastructure, we are requesting $2.1 million in FY24. Also, 1.5 in initial design cost for the Montgomery Hall renovation. Our total request for 24 very modest at 3.6 million. For FY25 through 28, we are requesting a total of 59.9 million in capital improvement program funding. Specifically, the FY24 campus infrastructure improvement funding request will fund important North Campus nodal loop modernization and improvements. Infrastructure projects beyond FY24 at 9.5 million include HVAC replacement, fume hood upgrades, building controls upgrades, masonry restoration, slate roof replacement on our historic buildings on campus, academic building window and entry door replacement, and road and parking lot upgrades. Next, the Montgomery Hall renovation. This renovation remains core to our strategic planning efforts to provide adequate facilities for academic programs as identified by our college campus master plan. An extensive renovation of this 40-year-old building is anticipated, which will improve energy efficiency, update all code compliance issues, and address significant programmatic space deficiencies. The governor's CIP recommends 1.5 million in design, as I mentioned previously, and that was accelerated from FY25. The college is requesting an additional 3.8 in final design and 7.5 in initial construction in 25, and the remaining construction funding in 26 to finish the renovation. We anticipate the total renovation costs at $40.8 million. And lastly, Calvert Hall interior renovation. The college has requested $2.5 million in FY28 to begin the design funding for planning for interior improvements in Calvert Hall, which is the primary administration building for the college, and it was constructed in 1932. Recent DBM funded infrastructure projects have addressed significant building envelope deficiencies. We are in the process now of replacing the entire HVAC system, upgrading the electrical system, doing masonry repair, slate roof replacement, and replacing all windows in the building. So now we are going to focus on life safety improvements for this 90-year-old building and interior upgrades, which will meet ADA code compliance, International Building Code Fund requirements, install fire suppression system, and provide other internal improvements. We estimate total renovation costs here at approximately $20 million. Next slide, please. So we officially opened the Nancy R. and Norton T. Dodge Performing Arts Center and the Learning Commons building last week. And I'll say that the Average White Band was the inaugural opening act for this great facility and was very well received. The Performing Arts Center includes a 700-seat auditorium, 125-seat recital hall, music ensemble and practice rooms, and faculty offices. These two buildings will be a game changer for Southern St. Mary's County and the college. And again, we remain extremely grateful to the state for all the financial support. Next slide. So that concludes our presentation, subject to any questions.
And does anyone have any questions of St. Mary's College? Commissioner Coleman.
Yes, two quick questions. What percentage of your graduates go on to professional school, professional or grad school?
By percentage, yeah.
We're sharing a screen.
You're
Forgive
sharing
us.
the screen.
A high percentage do. I don't have an exact number, but we're fortunate that a very high number of our students go on to grad school.
What percent of your students live on campus? Do you know that?
Almost all of them. We're a residential campus, so
Highly residential.
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Commissioner Boyd?
Yes, thank you. I have a question for St. Mary's College in terms of your internship program. What portion of your students opt to do internships versus study abroad or the research option that you mentioned? And I also wonder, do you have any data between completing internships and graduation rates from the school?
That's an excellent question. I don't have data for the latter question, but I can tell you of the three options, we launched our Center for Career and Professional Development formally last year with a new director. And it's really getting its legs. It's really taking off. Internships have always been a popular option here. I would say that increasingly internships have perhaps overtaken popularity over international study. Overwhelmingly, though, I would say that directed research is the most common of the three available for the Honors College Promise. That's connected to the fact that St. Mary's, one of the signature St. Mary's elements here is the capstone senior thesis, the St. Mary's Project. But because of the Center for Career and Professional Development, internships are increasingly very popular here. That's a growing segment of our external activity.
Great, thank you. Mhm.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I'd like to thank Dr. Gantz and Mr. Pusecker for being available for St. Mary's today. And we will now move to Morgan State University. And I believe we have Dr. David Wilson, president of Morgan State, ready to talk to us. So please proceed, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all members of the commission. Very excited to be here and to give you a quick overview about what's going on at Morgan State University. And I have with me Sydney Evans, our executive vice president, who also will be chiming in as appropriate. And so we have a number of slides, so we have sent those on to you. And so I'm going to race through these as if I were at Pimlico. And so if you would just move through these as quickly as possible. This is just what we're going to talk about today, and you can just kind of move through that as well. We always start out by just putting before the commission and all audiences our vision here at Morgan and what our mission is. And of course, ultimately, we are on track to become a very high research R1 university. We know where we are and the way Carnegie is looking at that. And so we think that within the next few years, Morgan too would be on the same floor as the University of Maryland College Park, Johns Hopkins, and as of late, UMBC. So moving right along to the next slide, our core values, we hammer those home here at Morgan. The Vice President for Student Affairs and I started 9 years ago, going to every residential hall on campus and spending about an hour and a half with all the residents there, talking with them about what we value at the institution. We're in the middle of that, have 2 coming up tonight, and we've done 6 so far. On to the next slide. On to the next slide. And this is just a sense of Morgan at a glance. We are now offering academic degree programs in over 140 academic programmatic areas, including now 23 doctoral or PhD programs and 62 undergraduate, 42 masters, et cetera, et cetera. On to the next slide. We also, of course, are, just as you heard from USM and other institutions, are approaching now the pandemic as an endemic and are moving forward to live with the consequences of that as well. On to the next slide. We, of course, have come to the end of our first 10-year strategic plan, Growing the Future, Leading the World. We now have just concluded our next 10-year plan. About a year ago, the board unanimously approved it here. And this is Transformation Morgan 2030, Leading the Future. And we have 6 of those goals. And you can see very prominently about a year ago, we were very public in saying that we intend to elevate Morgan's status to R1, very high doctoral research university in the country. And parenthetically, there is no HBCU in the United States that is currently an R1, very high research university. There are 10 of us that are R2s, Morgan, Howard, North Carolina A&T, Florida A&M, and the like. But we think we are absolutely poised to get on that floor as quickly as possible. On to the next slide. Yeah, we talked about the new academic degree programs. I want to just highlight number 4. Some of you may know that I serve as a member of the board of directors of the Lumina Foundation, and we keep our eyes on the number of adults in the United States with some college and no degree. It's about 38 million. And we brought those data back to Morgan several years ago and began to talk about what it would be like if Morgan, as the state's preeminent public urban research institution, with a very, very traditional population, were to also begin to look at what's happening with our adults in the state and around the country. That has led to our instituting 18 what we are calling completer programs here at Morgan. We are going after the some college, no degree market. We have established a new college of continuing education and interdisciplinary studies. All of these degrees are interdisciplinary. There are 8 of them that are at the baccalaureate level, 5 at the master's level, and 5 indeed at the doctoral level. Some courses that will fit what the students are interested in would be cloud computing, mechatronics engineering. Those 2 degree programs, by the way, are the only programs of that type that's being offered in the state of Maryland. On to the next slide. Of course, the long-running HBCU legal case ended legislatively. We received $15.1 million of that in this academic year. And this just gives you some sense of how we have already invested those dollars. And you can see that Morgan Completes U, CICS, $1.5 million we're investing in order to prop that college up, put in place the marketing, the infrastructure needed to go after the adult students. Within 2 years, we are expecting our population there to be about 200 and perhaps about 500 or so within the next 4 years. On to the next slide. Enrollment at Morgan is basically off. It's just through the roof. We have never seen anything like it before. We had to close down our application portal about a month earlier than we normally would. We simply would not accept any more applications if we could not enroll any more students. And so this is the 2nd straight year where we've had historic enrollments in our entering class. This year, we are racing toward 2,500 new freshmen. We had about 2,000, roughly 2,400 or so last year. As I looked at the enrollment this morning, is 9,600 students. Now, we have never, ever, ever in our 155-year history been in that type of category before. And we think that come October 15th, Secretary Fielder, when we have to submit these data to you, that we expect our enrollment to be around 9,200 or so students. Once again, very, very historic. On to the next slide. Now we can go through the next ones real quickly. And you can see here as well that enrollment trend at Morgan has just been enormous. If you look at 2020, we had 1,200 or so entering freshmen. That's a 100% increase, commissioners, in the students that are saying, we now want to go to Morgan State. They're saying that because of the alignment of academic degree programs that we put in place here. We've been very intentional about that with the very high quality faculty that we have and with the overall emphasis that the institution is placing on the quality of the student experience. And all that has made its way across the nation and indeed across the world. For the 2nd year in a row, we do have a larger number of out-of-state students than in-state students. I was surprised by that. So 56% of our incoming students are from out of state, representing 44 states. And so we certainly have a brand that has caught fire and is basically making its way all over the United States and indeed all over the world, but absolutely rooted right here in our great state of Maryland. On to the next slide. You can see the applications here. I'm not going to go into detail, but the same thing is happening on the graduate side of the institution. We are now, when I arrived at Morgan, we were awarding about 29 doctoral degrees a year. We are now close to 80, and we are projecting that to be above 100 in a couple of years. And with those numbers, there are several academic areas where we are #1 in the state of Maryland in conferring doctoral degrees to African Americans with those kind of numbers. Moving forward, please. And the same is true with our graduation rates, our retention rates, historic highs. We have a goal here of 50 by 25. We put in place about 5-6 years ago. We have no doubt that we will get there. We have just made tremendous progress. We won 4 national awards of all institutions in the United States, except the very, very, very highly selective ones in terms of institutional outcomes and student completion rates. And so we're very, very proud of the effort that our team has put in place to move as many students as possible across the finish line when they enroll at the institution. Please, let's go forward to the next one. Retention rates. Right now, we are at about 75% of those students that we admitted in fall of last year who are on our campus this year. This will be the 12th straight year where we've had retention rates here at Morgan of 70% and above. And our goal in the next plan is to move that to 80%. And we'll be right there with the top 2 or 3 institutions in our state. Moving forward, once again, to the next slide. That's the campaign. Next slide as well, in terms of what we focused on. Next slide. The faculty here at Morgan has been critical to retention and to graduation rates. They have been absolutely embracing of course redesign, looking at active learning environments, not just lecturing to students, but having students to be participants in the learning process, which is really, really some of the best practices that you find now in higher ed. It's not just filling up a lecture hall with 300 students and giving them the same lecture that perhaps their parents received when they were in college. Moving right along. And so next slide. In terms of our research, also we were able to secure $74 million this year in research grants. On to the next slide. This is reporting expenditures. And we also conducted a study to see how well we were doing in terms of our tech transfer and patents. And so what I can say to you on to the next slide is that for every $10 million that is invested in Morgan research, we lead the state and in the top institutions in the nation with regard to outputs, with regard to intellectual property disclosures, new patent applications, new patents for every $10 million in research. So Morgan is really, really returning to the state of Maryland and to the nation a very, very high percent of investment, if you will, on every $10 million of funded research that comes to the institution. And this is typically the way you look at that output. On to the next slide. And the overall economic impact of the institution, we updated this about 2 years ago. And so we got a state appropriation. This is before our state appropriation that we have now. That was about $105 million. So with that $105 million, our annual economic impact in the state of Maryland is $1.1 billion. And about 60% of that, of course, resides here in Baltimore City, over 500 or so jobs here in Baltimore City, and then throughout the state of Maryland. On to the next slide. And this is just a summary slide here, looking at all of what that means. I misspoke. 4,200 jobs in Baltimore City and 6,900 jobs that Morgan is responsible for supporting statewide in Maryland. And 640 million of that $1.1 billion impact is in Baltimore City. On to the next slide. So that brings me to our request for our operating budget this year. We understand the fiscal condition of the state, but I like to say that this request for operating is a parsimonious one. We are only asking for $18.2 million as our top priorities. And so given the vast research ascendancy of the institution, the state has funded 3 state-funded research centers for us, one of which we're about to nationally announce next week. And that is the Center for Equitable Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning. There's no such center that exists in higher education now where you have an institution like Morgan that is coming to the table saying, we understand the way these algorithms are being developed with regard to machine learning and artificial intelligence. But if you are bringing implicit bias into the room, then the algorithms and the outcome of that is going to also be laced with bias. And so we have an incredible team of diverse researchers here at Morgan, where we are moved forward with that state-funded center for $3.1 million a year. We are hiring 14 nationally renowned scholars to come in and prop that up. We just won a $5 million DoD grant that will go into this area as well. A $2 million earmarked. So this center is going to be announced with about a $14 million investment next week. But this year, we are asking, our top priority is for the state to support a national center for the elimination of educational disparities. We actually publicly announced this center on yesterday. I used $500,000 of a private gift to jumpstart it. And we are asking the state to sustain it so we can, we know here at Morgan what we need to tackle in order to reduce educational disparities in K through 12. And this institution is now ready to take on this particular task for our state and indeed for the nation. We also, we understand that with the, the CHIPS legislation that is being proposed, that we have to really raise our hand and say, there's an opportunity here for us to create a Center for Education and Research in Microelectronics, because we are concerned about the lack of diversity in this area. This was even pushed to us by Comptroller Peter Franco early on in this process. And we are asking for $3.1 million to enable us, once again, to be that center in Maryland, that center in the United States that is looking at these issues always with equity, always with diversity, always with fairness in mind. We are moving forward on opening in summer of 2024 a new Health and Human Services building. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. But when that building opens, it's going to mean quite a bit is needed in order to continually operate it. So $6.8 million to do that. $3.2 million for a center on brain science. We actually have a collaboration with the Lieberman Institute, where we have access to several African-American brains. And we want to tie that to a Center for Health Equity and kind of look at what we can learn with regard to perhaps diseases that have that could have been avoided, particularly in this population. And this would be the first center of its kind in the country. And then the last, we have a real concern here at Morgan about the preservation and advancement of our democracy, and who is participating in it, who is not. And so we are asking for what would be the only center of its kind on an HBCU campus in the nation that is designed specifically to study what is happening with our democracy and how certainly we can get young people to take ownership of it and to be more involved in it. If you could just skip through the rest of it, I'm coming to the end of my 20 minutes. And so that's on the operating side. On the capital side, we're asking for a total of $145 million in order to support some of our ongoing projects that you see listed in the presentation, as well as to support some upgrades and a couple of new projects as well. I'm not going to go into detail, but quite frankly, in this area, we could use about $400 million. But once again, we are understanding the financial limitations, but these funds are very, very critical to keep these projects moving along. On to the next slide. And we still have deferred maintenance. We want to thank the state for what it is investing in deferred maintenance here at Morgan, but we still have an unmet need of about $150 million. And we are pulling out all the stops, including borrowing money, because some of our legacy buildings just can't stand any longer, literally, without some kind of investment. So all the details are in the presentation for you. So if we could just move through the next set and just get to some of the pictorial pieces here, and then I will conclude. And so with regard to housing, with all of those students, of course, we have no place to house students. And so you may have been reading in the paper, we've had to lease an entire hotel in downtown Baltimore, nearly 500 beds. We have also leased almost an entire building near the University of Baltimore. We're housing about 350, 400 students there. We have leased 2 more facilities in Towson, where we're housing 400 or so students there. We also have Marble Hall Gardens Complex, and you may have heard that incident occurred over there. We really do not like our students over there, but we have no other options. We have 700, 800 students that are housed over there. And so we have to move forward. We have to find creative ways to build new student housing at Morgan. And commissioners, I have to say to you that one of the reasons why we do not have the kind of infrastructure around Morgan is unfortunately because of the historic redlining that occurred in our city. And as a result, developers and others were almost prohibited from investing in these Black neighborhoods around the university. And so we don't have the same kind of facilities around our campus that you would see at some of the other institutions. And so we don't have any option except to take our students halfway, it seems, around the city in order to house them. So we have to come up with these creative, very, very creative strategies now where we absolutely must, if we are going to continue just at the level that we are, enroll students and give them the highest quality undergraduate experience. So we did open this new first building on the campus, Mr. Evans, I believe in about almost 30 years. We opened this
That's correct.
at the beginning of the school year, 670 beds, named after late Justice Thurgood Marshall. And we can just advance through this real quickly. So we give the commission some sense of what these facilities look like. Students absolutely enjoying them. This is the Health and Human Services building. On to the next slide. That is slated to open in summer of 2024. It's going to house our School of Community Health and Policy and our School of Social Work. And then on to the next slide, where we spent a lot of time, almost 10 years, working with the community, working with developers, working with the owners of what had been a dilapidated shopping center adjacent to the campus to totally redevelop it. I'm pleased to report that that is absolutely coming to a conclusion now with all of these shops. The first time that the area has had a high quality supermarket, if you will, in who knows, 50 years. And so we just advanced through these slides. This is the Northwood Commons project, and it has the Leader Supermarket. This is where our new Barnes and Noble bookstore is going to be over there as well. We have a number of sit-down eateries. Quite a few of these businesses are either minority owned, owned by Morgan State University alumni, some of them. The development would not have occurred as well without the incredible assistance of Harbor Bank of Maryland. And we thank Joe Haskins for using new federal market tax credits, I think $20 million in order for us to eventually pull this across the finish line. And so I believe that is bringing us to the end of the presentation. And I thank you very much for this time. And Mr. Evans and I would be more than happy to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I believe Secretary Fielder has a question.
Sure. I can't hear you, Mr. Secretary.
Good morning, Dr. Wilson, and thank you for that presentation with all the encouraging news coming out about Morgan's growth. I had a couple quick questions related to the tremendous spike in growth in freshman enrollment. Do you know what percentage is tied directly to the 18 new interdisciplinary studies? And the second part of that is the system, as you know, has moved to ACT and SAT being optional for use in reviewing applications. I wanted to get your thoughts on both those.
Okay, thank you very much. So with regard to the new enrollment, the Morgan Completes U programs, that is not really right now a great factor in driving the enrollment. We, as of this fall, I believe, have about 80 students or so in those programs, with the expectation that we'll have 200 by fall of 2023. So we're not seeing that drive the enrollment. This is really amongst 18 to 22-year-olds for the most part from around the country. With regard to, I'm sorry. So with regard to a standardized test, we too are test optional, and I have supported that 10,000%. You may not know that I just finished my term as a member of the Board of Governors of the NCAA, and I'm still a member of the NCAA Division I Board of Directors. My term won't expire there until next year. The NCAA asked me last year to chair a national task force comprised of individuals from all of the NCAA conferences, looking at whether standardized tests should continue to be used to determine eligibility for participation in the NCAA. That task force was in operation for about 7 months. And we had all of the top scholars in the country to come in and give presentations. All the top brass from the College Board, from the ACT, all the top scholars from Stanford, all over. At the end, we were unanimous in recommending that that should be discontinued. And it was really based on what we heard in terms of the history of the SAT, ACT, how those tests were just not designed to do the kinds of things that we are using them for. And so therefore, armed with that, Secretary Fielder, there's no way that I could promote that as president of Morgan when now I am so in the know about what those tests are doing, and it's not the right thing. So we are using measures that have a higher correlation with college success, great grade point average, references, standing in class, high schools attended. I mean, those kinds of things. And that's what we are using here. And then last, we are in beta testing of our own instrument here at Morgan that is moving through the patent stage that will become the first comprehensive instrument in the nation that will look at these kind of non-cognitive factors that we think looking at Black populations and brown populations and limited resource populations would enable universities to make the right decisions as to who is more likely to be successful in college than not. It's a 99 item assessment tool with about 7 or 8 constructs.
Thank you, President Wilson. I do remember, I think 3 years ago in your budget testimony in Annapolis, you would describe that as grit, that students, you can't really evaluate the grit with standardized testing. I got a couple more quick ones. I just want to make sure the commissioners knew that we've received the stage 1 application with Morgan's leadership on establishing a first doctorate of osteopathic medicine at an HBCU. So that's another good marker that's moving forward. And the last question I had, Dr. Wilson, since the audit was just completed by the Department of Legislative Services, it listed quite a few things that were seen as problematic, and it's been public. I wanted to get your comments on that as we review these budget requests.
Mm-hmm. Yes, just a couple of those. The university stands behind our comments that we made in the public audit, if you will. There was, I think, one finding with regard to a hotel that we had secured in the Towson area in anticipation that the university would open, I believe, in the fall of 2021. And we basically had to do that because we had another university that had secured all of the hotels in this area. And that was our only option. And the way that contract was constructed, if you will, there was no option for a refund when the university decided that the pandemic conditions were so severe that we could not reopen the university as we anticipated. But Mr. Secretary Fielder, we stand behind the public comments that we made in the audit report.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDaniels.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson, my question is associated with the move toward Morgan being an R1 status and doctoral research. Are there fields of study that Morgan will focus on? It looks like you have a lot of diverse kind of programs. Is it more focused toward engineering or education? Could you make a comment on the focus of the doctoral research?
Yes, and so actually, Commissioner McDaniel, you're talking about R1 very high research status. So in essence, a very high research status institution will need to have in place very diverse research foci. And so it's not just your STEM degrees. And so if you look at even MIT, well, you can go to MIT and get also a business degree. You can go to MIT and get, and so if you look at our friend Johns Hopkins, you go to Johns Hopkins, get an education degree. You go to John, and so therefore you have to put in place these research foci across a number of areas, and then it just can't be focused all on your PhD programs only in engineering or only in the hard sciences. You have to have those programs in the social sciences, also in the humanities, and so so it will be a comprehensive research foci, but it won't be unfocused. And as I said, when we get to that top floor and we are there as an R1, we don't want to be like everybody else. What does that mean? We're going to take with us our history of social intergenerational mobility. We know how to take students where they are and put them in research environments, which is a high impact practice, and basically turn them out as individuals that any top PhD institution in the country would want to enroll. And in the process, we will be enrolling still a critical mass of first generation college going students. We will be enrolling still a critical mass of Pell Grant students. And so in essence, we don't see R1 as this kind of exclusive club where the institution is slowly closing its doors to a population that it has historically educated to the best of them in the country. Arguably, no institution is at that level now that is doing that. They are at that level by closing that pipeline, not by keeping it open. And that's what Morgan does not want to do in the least bit.
Thank you for that explanation.
And Commissioner Boyd.
President Wilson, you mentioned a number of new initiatives. I was intrigued by the Center for the Elimination of Educational Disparities focus on K through 12. Could you share with us a little bit more about how you see the structure of that center?
Yes, as a matter of fact, this center, as I said, it was publicly announced on yesterday. Dr. Glenda Prime, who is Dean of our School of Education and Urban Studies, will also be the founding director of this center. And it is interdisciplinary. It has about 4 foci areas. Of course, we are looking at this ecosystem that is critical, for the elimination of these gaps. One of those areas is actually parents and the way in which the center is going to design intervention with parents, particularly inner city parents, and to get them to a point where they are understanding their critical role in this process. Because Dr. Boyd, as a student of the sociology of education and social and cultural foundations of education, the way the systems are designed, they are designed as middle class value laden systems, right? And so a parent who is not in that kind of middle class classification, many of them are very intimidated to do things like come to a parent teacher meeting because they don't want to be judged by the teacher, and so they just simply stay away. I mean, the research has kind of shown this. So you got to get in there. You got to work with parents in a way where they don't feel that the school is espousing a set of values that is about demeaning them. And so that's just one component where we at Morgan, we feel that because of the reservoir of trust that we have with communities, we can go to some spaces research-wise, be authentic in those spaces, and people will actually embrace the results that we come forward with. Now, that's just one example, but there are curricular kinds of things and active learning environments and those kinds of things that the center will tackle as well. We had as the kickoff keynote yesterday, Dr. Maria Christopherson, who of course has led K through 12 superintendencies in 3 cities in the country. She just recently left Atlanta as the CEO of Atlanta Schools, went in to clean up what had taken place there in Atlanta. And then prior to that, she was the superintendent of Minneapolis, St. Paul in that area, and then of the city of Austin, Texas. And so she was very, very thorough in this area and looked at what the potential of this center is, and the fact that we have a lot of credibility to begin to thoughtfully disentangle this model and then put in place some different kinds of models and some different kind of structures.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, President Wilson and Mr. Evans, for being available for us this morning. And we will now move forward in the agenda. However, I do want to say something. I don't want our next presenters to worry. We're about 14 minutes over time, but I can make up for it at the end. So please, Sarah Fiddler, if you would present the MICUA information for us.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. So good morning. I think it's still morning to the chair and the secretary and the members of the commission. As Jeff just said, I am Sarah Fiddler. I'm president of the Maryland Independent College and University Association, or MICUA. Before I go too much further, I do want to thank the MICUA staff who worked on this presentation, specifically Aubrey Waddick, our research analyst, Angela Sherman, and Stephanie Thomas. They pulled all the data, information, and images of our campuses in our slides. And Dr. Sherman is actually on this call, and she is going to jump in and assist with questions if need be. Also want to thank all of you for your time. The MICUA institutions really appreciate being included, and we are so grateful for the longstanding and steadfast support of our students and our schools that the state provides. Next slide, please. MICUA represents 13, can you go back one? These are our schools. So MICUA represents 13 state-aided private nonprofit institutions of higher education in the state. Next slide, please. So the geographic regions covered by our locations, we're in about 180 different locations. And it's worth noting that 6 of our institutions are located in a county in Maryland that does not have a public 4-year institution. Next slide, please. Our student demographics reflect our diversity. 1 in 3 of our students is an underrepresented minority student. About half are students of color. About a quarter of our students are low-income students or Pell students. 1 in 6 of our new undergraduate students are transfer students, and we're very proud of our transfer partnerships with our community colleges, and I'll talk about that a little later. And then since 2017, MICUA institutions served over 3,000 adult learners, and we're pleased with how that is going too. Next slide, please. So again, thank you, Jeff. And Jeff provided us a roadmap through which to share information with you today. So one of the things we were asked about is net tuition. And the average net tuition price for a MICUA institution was $24,000 in the 2020-21 academic year. And while this is higher than the national median and the US average tuition, it is worth noting that it's not significantly higher. I also note for you that the breadth and depth of services at a MICUA institution is able to provide at a lower cost to taxpayers a valuable return on the state's investment. Next slide, please. So for enrollment, we are projecting modest overall enrollment growth over the next 5 years. This is more pronounced among graduate students than undergraduate students. Last year, as did many of our colleagues, we saw a slight decline in undergraduate enrollment, but we did see an increase in overall enrollment. Next slide, please. So we added this slide this year. During the last few years, we have seen an increase in the enrollment of in-state students at our institutions. We think perhaps because during the pandemic, students wanted to stay closer to home. And so the majority seem to be coming from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Montgomery County, but also from other parts of the state. And just over a third of our students are in-state students, about 21,000 of our 58,000. Next slide, please. Our underrepresented minority student enrollment continues to grow, and this is graphic representation of this trend by headcount. Next slide, please. So again, continuing with a trend, since the fall of 2011, we've seen a 34% increase in undergraduate underrepresented minority students. And so the cross-hatched part is our increase. Next slide, please. 5 of the MICUA schools have majority minority undergraduate student bodies, and 10 of our schools have minority communities of 30% or more. Next slide, please. Regarding low-income Pell Grant recipient students, again, wanted to show you a trend here from the 2009 to 2010 academic year. We have seen a 24% growth in enrollment of these populations. Next slide, please. So collectively, the MICUA institutions offer over 1,700 approved academic programs, roughly half of which are undergraduate degrees, and the other half are master's and doctoral degrees. We also offer both undergraduate and graduate certificates. Next slide, please. So some examples of new and current programs that we have launched include programs in sustainability, cybersecurity, and computer science, and the health sciences. And this is not exhaustive. This was just to give you some examples. Next slide, please. So since the establishment of the state's 55% completion goal, the MICUA institutions have been a ready and willing partner in this effort. And during the 5-year period between 2017 and 2021, MICUA schools produced about 80,000 degrees. This was about 20,000 in liberal arts-related STEM degrees, 4,000 in nursing, 6,000 in engineering, and 700 in cybersecurity. Next slide. I also wanted to talk a little bit about education degrees produced over that same time period. We're looking at 12,000 education degrees. 10 of the 13 MICUA institutions have educator preparation programs, and we're proud that we've produced 85 county teachers of the year, 8 Maryland State Teachers of the Year, 4 National Teachers of the Year, and 2 National Teachers of the Year. Next slide, please. In addition to raw degree production, some of the programmatic efforts that we make to assist with the 55% goal include a program called Finish in 4 that allows for designing of a student's own major, student planning platforms that allow students to map out multiple semesters in advance to ensure progression toward graduation, co-requisite courses that complement and support foundational and supplemental support and guidance. Next slide, please. Learning centers, federally funded initiatives, a Trailblazers program that provides retention and success support, and targeted financial aid and student success coaches. Next slide, please. And so in addition to those 55% initiatives, other innovative practices at the MICUA institutions include partnerships with our community colleges, our historically Black colleges and universities, our local communities. We've established summer bridge and pre-college residential programs on our campuses. We operate food pantries. We participate in the Coalition for College Cost Savings. We participate in a Title IX Services Collective and the Guaranteed Access Partnership Program, which I think you know about, but I'm going to talk about a little more in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're particularly proud of our partnership with the Maryland Community Colleges through the Teagle and Arthur Vining Davis Foundation's planning grant that we received. So 10 of the MICUA schools have partnered with all 16 community colleges, working together to improve transfer pathways from community college to a liberal arts degree. 4 work groups were established to cover simplicity, success, scholarly pathways, and security. And MICUA intends to submit an implementation proposal later this year. Next slide, please. Retention rates at our institutions are high. We have 83% for our undergraduate students and 74% of first-time, full-time freshmen who are enrolled in a MICUA institution graduate from that same institution within 6 years. This increases to 81% when the analysis includes students who transfer and graduate from the institution to which they transferred. Next slide, please. When analyzing Pell Grant recipients' graduation rates, the MICUA institution students outperform both the national 4-year private and public institutions averages. Next slide, please. And collectively, MICUA has the highest graduation rates nationally. MICUA comes in at 81% as compared to the US private average of 79%, US public average of 72%, and the overall national average of 67%. Next slide, please. Thanks. So wanted to talk just for a minute about the return on investment for our students. I believe it's noteworthy. PayScale annually ranks mid-career earnings of graduates with a baccalaureate degree, and 3 MICUA institutions are in the top 5 for Maryland. I also wanted to mention that all 13 MICUA institutions are in the top 25 of this list. Next slide. So of course, you never want anyone to default on a student loan, but we did want to note for you that MICUA students default at a lower rate than any other sector. Nationally, all of higher ed student loan default rate is 7.3%, whereas the MICUA institutions are at 2.8%. Next slide, please. So the MICUA budget requests for fiscal 24 include operating, which is the Sellinger program, capital, and need-based financial aid. And so we are so grateful for all of the support that the state gives to us. And last year's funding was particularly generous, and we anticipate using it to ensure that the students in Maryland have access to the institution of their choice, and that programs and supports are in place that increase diversity, close the achievement gap, and produce workforce credentials that will contribute meaningfully to Maryland's economy, everything that's in the state plan for higher education. Because Sellinger funding is calculated pursuant to a formula that piggybacks off of the full-time equivalent students at the public 4-year institutions, we are linked to public institutional enrollment and appropriation. This method of funding has served us well, and we ask that it be maintained and continued. Therefore, the projections on this slide simply represents a maintenance of effort from the state in fiscal 24 of $118 million, which you can also see would come out to roughly $2,600 per student. Next slide, please. The vast majority of our Sellinger funding is used for financial aid for Maryland students. In fiscal 22, which is the year for which we have most recent data, 90% or $80 million of the $89 million was used for financial aid, and 10% was used for other access, success, and innovation programs, again, that are consistent with the state plan. Next slide, please. So the MICUA schools use 4% of the state's funding for higher education, while educating 17% of all college students in Maryland, and conferring 26% of baccalaureate, master's, and doctoral degrees that are awarded by 4-year institutions in the state. Next slide, please. Thank you. I want to talk for a few minutes about the capital budget. MICUA continues to coordinate the capital budget requests from our institutions. We limit how often an institution may request funding from the state, and we cap the amount of money that the institution can request. We require approval from the institution's governing board, and we review the project for readiness and compliance with state specifications. Next slide, please. For fiscal 24, this coming year, MICUA will have 4 projects in the queue. Capital Technology University is renovating laboratory space, specifically computer science, electronics, physics, robotics, and unmanned autonomous systems laboratory spaces on their campus. The request will be for $1.5 million, and the project has a total cost at this time of $4.1 million. Johns Hopkins University will be renovating the School of Education building. The projects and programs within the School of Education are decentralized right now, and so the project will bring a synergy and combined structure for the program. Johns Hopkins is requesting a $5 million grant from the state, and the project will cost $21 million. Loyola University Maryland is going to be requesting $5 million from the state for a $36 million project. This grant will help to renovate the Donnelly Science Center, modernizing the classrooms and lab spaces, updating the research facilities, and improving the teaching spaces. And the 4th project will be at Washington College. Washington College will request a $2 million grant for a total project cost of $4.7 million to renovate projects on campus that are the primary buildings in which students interact for student learning, accessibility, and sustainability. The total ask from MICUA this year is going to be $13.5 million, and we estimate that this will leverage over $50 million in private, external resources and support over 470 construction jobs in the state. Next slide, please. So the Guaranteed Access Partnership Program is or GAP program is a program of which we're very proud. We match funds for any student who receives a guaranteed access grant from the state, which are the high achieving, lowest income students. And since 2017, MICUA member institutions have matched $55 million for Maryland students, which has resulted in over $100 million for Maryland's low income, high achieving students to attend a MICUA institution. Next slide, please. So a few brief words about financial aid. As I mentioned, MICUA uses the vast majority of our Salinger funds for financial aid for Maryland students. This ensures that students have access and choice of the institution that will best fit their needs. In fiscal 22, again, it was $80 million. We also awarded $257 million in additional institutional-based aid to assist students with accessing and affording a MICUA education. As always, we urge the state to increase need-based financial aid for Maryland students. We note that when compared with the national average, we lag behind what many other states invest in this manner. Next slide, please. So that's all. Our fall semesters are off to a great start. And again, that's due in part to your wonderful support. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Sarah Fiddler? Mr. Secretary.
Yes, I'd like to compliment MICUA and Sarah Fiddler on the leadership that has occurred in terms of the tremendous growth in percentage. And I think you stated 34% increase in minority enrollment. Actually, I believe over that 10-year slide that you showed is more like 51%. So I think that's very notable. And also the increase in Pell students, and at some point in terms of the longitudinal study, how the Pell students as compared to the non-Pell students matriculate in terms of, you know, has that achievement gap closed, those kinds of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, President Fiddler, well, thank you for your information. And we're going to move on now to our community college segment. And we're going to start off with Brad Phillips, the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges.
Good morning. I can still say that for at least 4 more minutes. Glad to be here today to talk to you, commissioners and Mr. Secretary. It's been hard to listen to these conversations and not want to chime in along with the discussion all throughout. You probably picked up a theme that community colleges are working very closely with all institutions in higher ed to create a seamless transfer pathway, whether it be implementing the Transfer for Success Act or the TEAGLE grant. I'll take note that when you saw Joe Boffman talk about the strategic plan being a student-centered focused plan, it wasn't just a bullet on a slide, and we're really going to miss her. I reserve my comments to say them now for Joe Boffman. So please, Ellen and Chad, tell her how much she'll be missed from our perspective and how she really has changed the culture of higher education. So with that, I'd just like to talk a little bit about community colleges. We're very, there's a lot to be proud of. We're getting some national recognition for being one of the best community college systems in the nation, but we also have some severe challenges, which you've been hearing throughout today around enrollment, which we can get into. But you can see we have 16 community colleges with 23 campuses, 3 colleges, College of Southern Maryland, Chesapeake College, and Warwick Community College, serving multiple counties. One of the things that you'll see as we sort of implement the blueprint legislation is that we're actually going to be involved a lot more within each local area high school for dual enrollment opportunities, whether it be in continuing education or credit courses for dual enrolled students. So that will, I think, influence sort of our footprint going forward. Next slide, please. It's hard to describe in one sentence a community college student. You can see how many students are entering into the community college and for what reasons they're entering, whether they be adults, lifelong learners, or students seeking to transfer, or our workforce development programs. Also, again, beginning to grow out the dual enrollment piece. That, despite enrollment declines, has been the fastest growing portion of our enrollment. It's increased percentage-wise since 2013 astronomically, and we think now with the blueprint legislation, that's going to even expand even more. Students are no longer capped at taking 4 courses at a community college. They can earn an associate's degree while they're in high school if they have been deemed college and career ready in 10th grade. And that's going to be a significant milestone. We're also going to be building out sort of our workforce programming, whether it be licensure and certification. The state has had this goal of 55% with degrees, but it also has a 45% goal for recent high school students or high school students to graduate with some type of credential beyond a high school diploma. And we're, again, just at the early stages of really developing that and building that out. The CTE committee has just been formally complete. I guess all the membership has been named and is beginning to meet. And we're looking at ways to really build out that licensure and certification opportunity for students in high school. So there's a lot of work ahead, but this will help, I think, in a lot of ways, Maryland achieve its goals of 55% and 45% in credentials. Next slide, please. So this is just basic demographics about community college students in general. One of the things to note is that we have a lot of credit students, but also non-credit students are about the same. Credit students fall within an academic year calendar, where our non-credit students fall on a fiscal year, and they start and stop all throughout the fiscal year. But put them together, you can see that the vast majority of Marylanders are accessing community colleges to begin their post-secondary educational experience, whether it be in career or transfer programs. Despite the decline in enrollment, this is something I would really like to see the numbers on and work with MHEC on, that we only have the first 2 years of students in undergrad. And when you make that comparison with our 4-year counterparts who have juniors and seniors, it really sort of artificially inflates that. But if we look at the students just beginning their experience in post-secondary, just that first year, I think you'll see a tremendous number of students, Marylanders, accessing community colleges as their primary source for post-secondary. You can see that we're 39% Caucasian white students. We're clearly a minority majority state. You can see our numbers, and we're really trying to do a lot more to build a diverse presence to help underserved populations that have traditionally not had exposure or experience with post-secondary. Next slide, please. Just like the USM's strategic plan, we too have undergone a new strategic plan. We're in the 2nd year of that plan. And I would like to say that these aren't goals. These are things that we're doing. These are basic competencies that we want to build off of going forward, that we think we're doing right, that aligns with the state plan, that we want to double down on. And I just want to say from the very beginning that we looked at creating a diversity and equity and inclusion aspect. But what we decided to do is build that into each one of these specific competencies or goals that are listed here. So it was so important that it wasn't a standalone. We wanted to embed it in everything that we did. We've talked a lot about what we're doing with the first, protecting the value of the associate's degree and creating seamless transfer. We've done a lot with building out a technical platform, enhancing ARTSIS, working with system and MICUA institutions to really create this seamless transfer pathway. It is an equity issue. If a student leaves and takes credits with them and they do not transfer in the way that they were anticipated to, those students will have to retake a course. And that just adds time and expense and money that could potentially create a situation where a student might not earn their degree. Again, we talked a little bit about building the new workforce. This is a big piece of what we're trying to get people to understand when we have big spending bills and infrastructure legislation, that skills are a part of that infrastructure. And we really need to have that bench of talent and skill-based learning so that Maryland's ready to go when these opportunities come forward. Always wanting to protect affordability for the state's well-being. And the last one is also something that's really about innovation and transformational opportunities for education. The pandemic spiked this as an interest. We realized that there was huge disparities across the state when it comes to broadband or access, and also even within some of our more wealthy counties, there were still students who could not attend because they did not have the basic broadband access. So we've done a lot to create opportunities for those students as well. Next slide, please. This gives you a little bit of a breakdown of how we are funded, and it's an important visual because the local governments across Maryland pay the majority share of the cost, our operating cost, followed by tuition, along with the state being 23%. When our enrollment declines, we're losing a significant portion of our tuition revenue. Just make a note of that. This would ideally be a third distribution between the local governments and the students and the state. But the state is coming in at 23rd. You can go to the next slide, please. But I have to say, we could not accomplish where we are without the state's support throughout the pandemic, and especially last year with the full funding of the CAID funding formula for the first time in its history, 25 years. And I know there's a tendency to look at the year-to-year increase as being sort of a budgeting factor, but really what's important for us to understand, for you to understand, is that 29% funding per FTE is really a policy initiative that was designed to distribute funding across higher education in an equitable manner. Previous years, whenever there's been a budget shortfall and there's been a need for reductions, what happens is they take that percentage and they drop it, meaning that they're still giving the University System of Maryland or institutions that run the formula that dollar, but our percentage of that has declined. So this is, again, equitable distribution of state resources. We have finally hit that 29% funding, and it couldn't have come at a more important time, critical time for community colleges. And our ask is just to maintain that link. It's hard to estimate what that will look like because we don't know the final budget outlook for what the USM institutions will be getting per FTE. But as long as that link is maintained, it's a demonstration to my presidents and our colleges that they too are getting an equitable distribution of the state resources. And this is also true for Baltimore City Community College, who has a separate formula. Their link was finally achieved as well. And we just want to continue that, that funding policy going forward. Next slide, please. I want to thank Secretary Fielder for being a part earlier this week with our capital budget hearings with the Department of Budget and Management, and stayed the whole time as each of our presidents justified the requests that they're making from the state. And just like USM, a lot of these projects are renovations, unless those renovations do not adequately address the needs of a specific program, and that's when we have to create new construction. But the vast majority of these programs are really renovating existing resources. We too are struggling with the cost escalations. I heard increased costs up to 30% during those DBM hearings, which is a hard thing for my colleges because we don't just receive state support, we also receive funding from the county, and the counties have to support that increase as well. And when they cannot, projects get pushed back, they get delayed a year. So this is very critical to have the support of the state for these projects to move forward. 30% increases is really an incredible skyrocketing expense. So again, on our capital prioritization, Baltimore City Community College will come in with their own requests. They're a state agency, so they are run outside of the community college capital construction grant. Okay, go ahead, next slide. Finally, the community college facilities renewal grant has been a tremendous benefit to the colleges who, say, for example, a Montgomery College or a community college of Baltimore County, who have 50 facilities. And when we used to do it, they would have to run these facility renewal projects through our capital prioritization, making hard decisions about really growing the institution in a new academic facility or renovating a facility, or having to choose between a roof replacement or an HVAC system update. we were able to pull all of those projects out of the capital prioritization process and place them in the facilities renewal grant, which has been a tremendous help for all of the colleges as well. So we're asking again for the full amount of that grant going forward. Next slide, please. Again, these are going to continue to be our key issues going forward: advancing transfer, dual enrollment, workforce readiness. Dual enrollment is one right now where we have heartburn trying to figure out how the blueprint will fund it. We no longer can bill the students on behalf of the local education institution. So we're really kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to see how we're going to get reimbursed by the state for students who are enrolled in high school. And again, workforce readiness, continuing to push to build out the skills necessary for Maryland's economy. Next slide, please. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Are there questions for the Maryland Association of Community Colleges? Secretary Fielder. I think you're muted, sir.
And boy, that was a good statement. Dr. Phillips, a quick question to clarify. You made the statement about the transfer reimbursement from the state. Could you clarify what you meant from when you said from the state?
Yes. So back in 2013, when the College Completion and College and Career Readiness Act passed, it said it really launched the dual enrollment program. What has happened with the blueprint is it took the existing statute and cleaned it up, struck out a lot of the superfluous information, and said 75% of the tuition will be the cost and the school systems will pay. It struck out all of the language that would have allowed us to bill those students on behalf of the high school. And in this gray area where we are now, there's no study that's been created that will define what it means to be college and career ready in order for students to access this. So we're working off of our MOUs that we have had since 2013 for dual enrollment. So we have some counties that are looking for that partnership where they'll get reimbursed for those students. And we have certain counties that have already contributed and are paying for it. So it's a mixed bag. But we're needing clarification, and we've been working with the Accountability Implementation Board, the Maryland State Department of Education, and we're still just continuing to wait for that guidance. And it's particularly problematic right now, Mr. Secretary, because those students are enrolled, and this is a huge liability on our books, and we're just needing to have clarity on that.
No, I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that statement for our commission so that, you know, if the 25% has to be made up by the local school districts, that it's clear on that, and with no expectation that MHEC has this pool of money and budget, which we don't, to contribute to that 25%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Boyd?
Yes, I have a question related to the enrollment pattern that you're seeing now. What is going on with community colleges in general? Just give us some information about that.
Absolutely. Initially we thought it could be contributed to the pandemic. We're digging in a little bit more. We're realizing there's some demographic trends as well that you heard earlier today. But we've even dug in to the point where we're beginning now to realize that there's better predictors of students' enrollment patterns than demographics and pandemic. And there really has been a social change as a result of some of the things going on around us, whether it be the pandemic or retiring baby boomer generation, creating low unemployment. Employment is always countercyclical to community college enrollment. We're realizing there's also here's the new word I'm learning as we discuss this, is psychographic data, psychographic details that categorizes students based on attitudes and aspirations. It's a psychological criteria. And a lot of it is the return on investment they don't see. They're looking more at skills. They want skills. They don't understand necessarily how that correlates to going to a community college when they could say, for example, and this is just recent research from the Gates Foundation, go on YouTube and figure out how to do the skill that they're trying to learn. We have such an employment crunch that people are being enticed by almost artificially high wages into either the gig economy or some other type of short-term employment, and they're opting to do that just to put food on their table. We have to really think about their needs. It used to be our financial aid was clear: tuition and fees, books and supplies, room and board. Those are not the needs. They are certainly a part of it, but we have a population that's homeless. They don't know where they're going to get food. They don't know how they're going to get daycare for their children. They have all sorts of these other assistant services that they need provided. And we're trying to sort of rethink that. Even the last project on our capital list from Montgomery College is a Germantown Student Services Center. We're looking at ways to really help students understand the return on investment, help them with those needs, whether it be a food insecurity or homelessness, or whether it be childcare. And thinking about those is also part of the picture as to why students aren't coming to our institutions.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for the community colleges? Commissioner Coleman?
Yes, I have a quick question. I notice now the trend in community college gearing more toward academics to go in to get a higher degree. Is it less, are you not focusing on the trade type, like air conditioning, auto mechanics, those type of degrees in a community college?
No, absolutely. We are, Mr. Commissioner Coleman. That's a big piece of what we do. And that's actually where one of our strengths is in an enrollment growth. Those programs are usually in our continuing education side of our institutions, and they are growing. And we're really trying to work to build those out because there are such high needs in those fields for employment.
Right.
In fact, the big problem is you don't get the same mileage anymore that you used to a century ago, or just at the turn of the 20th century, the 21st century, with a high school diploma. You really have to get some type of post-secondary beyond high school, but it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. And we're really connecting and trying to get people to understand that a short-term licensure can get you gainful employment and increase your quality of life. So we're really, really trying to work on that as well.
Okay.
And any other questions? All right. Well, continuing with community colleges, we would like to welcome Dr. Deborah McCurdy, president of Baltimore City Community College. Dr. McCurdy?
There we go. Good afternoon. I think you can hear me. I have two colleagues with me this afternoon, so we're very appreciative. Secretary Fielder, this is a great opportunity for us to come before the commissioners, and we're very pleased to do that. The support that we've had over the last few years on just closing out a third year at Baltimore City Community College and going through our realignment task. A lot of our realignment task and mandates from the legislature are embedded in the presentation today. We are in a great spot at Baltimore City Community College as we continue to recover, both as we're moving back toward more reasonable enrollment. Our facilities, projects, and so forth are moving in the right direction, along with our branding and our interface with the community. So we're very pleased to be at this point. We could not be there, certainly without the support and help coming in from MHEC and state agencies as well. It's just been a pretty good transformation and transition for the institution as well. This afternoon, with my two colleagues, Vice President Becky Burrell, along with our new member, our new Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Hardy, to take you through a lot of the presentation content for the college and starting with the some of the accountability factors for us and the true integration of the institution strategies along with the Maryland State plan for education, and that's all integrated with the Maryland Association of Community Colleges and looking at their strategic plan as well. So I'd like to as well have both colleagues will interface. We'll get through still with the time allotted, but would like them to interface with the commission in terms of some of the contents. VP Burrell?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, President McCurdy, and thank you all for BCCC's opportunity to present to you today. If you can go to the next slide, please. And as President McCurdy indicated, BCCC is actively working towards strategic approaches to meeting our goals. We are aligning not only with realignment, but also one of the realignment tasks, Task 12, speaks to the strategic plan. So we are actively aligning the state plan with the college's plan around the three goals for the state. Next slide, please. Along those lines, the indicators that the state has indicated that all institutions, state institutions have to meet, we are focusing heavily, as you heard earlier with Dr. Phillips, on dual enrollment, looking at our market share. As the city's community college, it's important that we focus on the things that are integral and of a priority to the citizens of our communities and our neighboring partners. We're looking at developmental education. I'll share some insights with regard to where we are with developmental completion, as well as looking at awards, right? The goal is finish, whether it's on the credit side or the non-credit side, the workforce side, continuing education. We're strategically looking at access, success, and innovation. Next slide, please. Along those lines, you can look at some of the characteristics that the state has outlined through the Performance Accountability Report. And again, we provide insights with regard to our performance measures. And again, we're really looking towards strategic approaches. I'll talk about the policies and the impact of policies a little bit later, but we're seeing some significant improvements for our developmental education students. You know that we're open door policy, open door institution, and so that means a lot of first generation students come here, as well as speakers of other languages choose BCCC both on the credit and the non-credit side. Next slide, please. And as we're looking towards information as it pertains to our programs, I think one of the dynamic attributes or assets of BCCC is in our licensing programs, whether it's our nursing program, respiratory care programs. Our students are thriving as they're graduating in these programs. Our completion rates of those students passing their licensure exams is in compliance with the state as well as the national rankings. And we're looking towards different strategies towards ensuring that those students that are in those programs have the support that they need to complete. Next slide, please. And as you're looking at our annual unduplicated head count, this is important because we know that we have a lot of national and state and local influencers as you're looking at the continuing ed drop in enrollment. Some of those factors were directly correlated with national leadership. As you see that there are different changes in how policy, national, state policy influences our English speakers of other languages. That was the decline that you see year over year from 2018 to 2022. You'll see that there was a modest increase from 21 to 22, and that was with regard to that demographic, English speakers of other language attendees coming to BCCC. And again, another attribute to that demographic line is also with regard to, of course, the pandemic and individuals being able to access those resources. Those weren't virtual. A lot of those component parts are online, and a lot of those programs were hands-on and not offered virtually. So when you're thinking about CDL, we have a phenomenal CDL program. That's something that has to be face-to-face and couldn't be offered online. So that's attributed to the decline in the continuing education side. Next slide, please. Going back to policy, President McCurdy, as we're realigning, has charged each of us as cabinet members to look at the institutional policies and how do we align what the state is doing with regard to remediation. So there's a Maryland, as you're aware, a Maryland charge with regard to, students completing. And if they don't have to take developmental education courses, let's eliminate that for those students, eliminate that barrier. And so over the last 5 years, we were having students that were testing into developmental education at 90%, right? And so now we're decreasing that number. Now we're down to 55%. Last year, we were right below the 53, 54%. And you can see that right now we're at 55%. But again, that's because we introduced a college level readiness policy, which allows students not to have to only test to get into college. They can use their grade point average. They can use prior learning experience. So there's a lot of ways that we're looking at straight out of high school students, in addition to old adults that are returning that have prior learning experience, to shorten the time to completion so that they can get to work. Next slide, please. Also, as we're looking at some of the data with regard to the Performance Accountability Report, and again, these metrics are given to us by the Maryland Higher Education Commission. BCCC is very unique in that we do not offer student loans. So that means that the students that come to BCCC receive their funding either through grants, scholarship, but we try to make sure that our students come out without having that debt. So we don't offer student loans, and you can see through our trend line that we had a modest decline, about 4-point decline from FY20 to 21, and that was really due to some of her funding that the institution received as a part of the pandemic. Next slide, please. And as we're looking at our graduation rates, you can see that we've had an increase in the graduation rate, although the N has declined. That N is also attributed to the pandemic. So we offer a lot of health science programs, and those health science programs, if you recall, we had to suspend a lot of our clinical opportunities for those students, and so those students would have matriculated in upcoming years, right? So that means that end of 360, where it was prior in the 400s, that in those students would be completing because they had to complete their clinical work in the hospitals and health entities in the future. Next slide, please. As we look at the degrees and certificates awarded, and just a point of clarity, you're looking at the total awards, and then you're looking at unduplicated graduates. Some of our students take certificates and degrees at the same time, so that duplication in the total number, the 433, are unique individuals who may have earned a certificate and a degree at the same point in time. But we do know that we did have, again, through a lot of our programs, incompletes due to COVID. Part of our charge was to make sure that our students were attaining the knowledge base and allowing them the time to complete the courses, of which you'll see our numbers increase here in the future as we report out the student progress towards earning their degrees and certificates. Those students would have completed in FY23. Next slide, please. And then as we look at the impact of our Pell Grant and our our developmental education students kind of in total, we know that we've had the reduction in developmental education with regard to the introduction of policy, as I mentioned earlier. And if we can go to this next slide, just for the sake of time, BCCC has a predominance of females at our institution, and we are working very aggressively towards introducing programs that may attract more men to our institution. So I mentioned the CDL program, also more cyber or IT related programs, so that we can increase that ratio. The majority of our students are part-time, and that also attributes to our students' completion rates. President McCurdy?
Yes, and as you see, our trends in enrollment between fall 2017 and 21, you could see that we were on the rise. I entered the picture in fall of 2019. We were beginning to go back to where the earlier enrollments were back in 2012, 2013, where you saw enrollments of 6,000 plus students. Fall 20, that was the first fall for the pandemic to hit. You can see the drop. You can see the continuous drop in fall of 21. And as we move into fall of 22, we'll begin to see some of that level off, but we will expect to see that it won't level off fully until next year. What is interesting is the dual enrollment climb, having lower numbers when we first arrived, but our relationship has to be an ongoing one with Baltimore City Public Schools to get early admissions and entry with dual enrollment students as well. Next slide. You can see these, this slide is a particular interest that came out of MHEC, some very early projections. And the first grouping of information is where we were back in 2021 with MHEC projections of, this is across all the two-year institutions. So if you go all the way to the end, you can see fall of 2029, 143,000. The new projection that came in that MHEC has basically realign their projections at 120,000. We would be in there somewhere as well. You can see the second tier is for BCCC. So in 2021, the projection from MHEC was for 2029, we'd be at 7,800. In realigning those projections, it's now at 4,690. The third tier is BCCC's internal projection. And as we look at where we were in 2021, projecting that we would be 7,360 in 2029, we've realigned that as well. So we're still coming in higher than where MHEC is projecting, because I think the numbers are there in our relationship with Baltimore City Public Schools and surrounding, so that we're projecting beyond what MHEC has also laid out. Next slide. You can see we brought in tuition. We are still the lowest tuition, certainly in the state. We're very pleased with that. It's certainly a good marketing tool, but also given our demographic, we are the community's community college, serving a primary urban environment coming out of Baltimore Public Schools, and we still kept our tuition at $110 a credit hour, and then out of state is at $280, still lower than most of the other institutions as well. Next slide. Our number of positions budgeted, faculty 115, non-faculty 322. Our number of programs at 30 degrees, 18 certificate programs, and we'll be looking to grow those as well. One of our 12 realignment tasks really was to bring in new programs and degrees. And as we begin to focus, we have several new programs that have already been submitted to MHEC. They'll be there for final approval as well. Next slide. Mr. Hardy is our new Chief Fiscal Officer, has been with us just a few weeks, and certainly wanted Mr. Hardy to have an opportunity to talk about the budget and fiscal projections. Mr. Hardy?
Yes, thank you, Dr. McCurdy. Here is a real high-level overview of our operating budget for fiscal year 2024. Our budget is $81.2 million. As you will note, a significant portion of that, approximately 54%, comes from the tremendous aid that we receive from the state, that being $43.7 million. Next slide. On the expenditure side, to match the budget, again, our budget's $81.2 million. You'll see the lion's share of that tied into salaries and benefits. That's $43 million, or 53% of our expenditure budget. Next slide, please. Here's just a general overview of funds we received related to the pandemic. Is broken out in two categories. The budget for allocated for fiscal year 2022 is 10.6 million. Of that, we expended 7.2 million. That went to things like PPE, tuition and fees to help students, also laptops and other equipment to enhance the experience for students at the institution. Next slide. Here it talks about the capital debt service for the institution. The institution is authorized to go out for 65 million for auxiliary and academic, for funding for auxiliary and academic facilities. Here we're in the discussion as a preliminary stages to try to figure out how to maximize debt to address some of the aging facilities here at the institution. At present, as of June 30, 2022, there is no outstanding debt for the college. Next slide, please. Here we move into our 5-year capital plan, which covers the timeframe of fiscal year 2024 to 2028. Here you'll see our Learning Commons renovation building. What I'd like to highlight here is we received $2.2 million in fiscal 2023 for the design phase. The design phase will be asking for an additional $1.2 million to finish the space. That will add 17,000 square feet and increase our capacity in terms of study space and space for food services. Next slide, please. Here is our nursing building renovation. Here, an additional space that we'll be adding is 13,468 square foot to the building. We requested $3.6 million for fiscal year 2024 for the design phase. The anticipated project cost will be $43 million. The project is expected to be completed in fiscal year 2027. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here is our facilities replacement building. Currently, that is a trailer. So we requested approximately $495,000 for the design phase to design space for a permanent building to house that operation. The anticipated budget for that is $7.7 million, and we expect that project to be completed in fiscal year 2026. Next slide, please. Here's the college's wellness center. For fiscal year 2026, we will have an ask of $2.9 million for the design phase to start that. And objective there is to house our recreation, health, and physical therapy, which will provide additional space for students, staff, and the community partners. That project is expected to cost $37.2 million. We expect that to be completed in fiscal year 2028. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here are our deferred maintenance. The college did have an assessment by a company by the name of Sidelines and determined that the college was $40 million behind on deferred maintenance. And so the college is requesting $16 million for deferred maintenance for fiscal year 2024. And then after that, $8 million per year to just catch us up, to get us what we need. What that will allow us to do is really, it's a safety issue. It's going to address our HVACs, which are past their life. Some of them have just died and stalled out, and also allow us to address ADA compliance issues. Next slide, please. Here's a project underway, Perimeter Loop Road improvements. That project started September 1st, 2020. We expect that to be completed in 2023. And really that will connect all our lots so that students can, visitors to the campus can reach each parking lot from the loop. Also, that's a safety issue. It will help with the egress across the campus, and then it will just make it a more user-friendly experience. Next slide, please. And last on the list is the Bard Building. This is our demolition project. The governor awarded $7.4 million for demolition of the Bard Building. Here, there's a winning bid for the design documents. The schematics have been reviewed. We expect that project to go underway and be completed before the end of calendar year 2023. Next slide. Again, we thank you for your support and your time, and we open it up to questions.
Are there any questions for Baltimore City Community College? Commissioner Boyd.
Yes, I was wondering if we could have a little bit more information on the dual enrollment effort that the community college is making with the schools in that area.
Yes, Commissioner, we are reaching out and working with Baltimore City Public Schools and looking at each school. Each school has somewhat of an independent response to dual enrollment, which means that we're working with not just their liaison, but with the principals there to identify which courses are going to make most sense at the schools. We're looking now at how to certify some of their teachers as well. I've come from a state where we actually certified the high school teachers with the appropriate master's degrees in the discipline to also teach within the high school. That makes it a lot easier. So many of our classes now are actually being taught in the high school. We do have some of the students, both for dual enrollment and P-TECH, actually coming on site, but the rest are being taught at the high school. So we're looking at expanding. When I first arrived here, we only were working with about 5 schools. Last year, we probably had that up to about 15 or 16. So the push really is to have that relationship. Every school, every student coming out of Baltimore City Public Schools really should be looking at graduating with minimum of 3 to 6 hours. What a difference that would make if we could get students started with dual enrollment, early college at the very beginning. So we're continuing to grow it. I think you saw the numbers when I arrived, they were about 100 and something. We were just a little bit under 500, and there's a tremendous opportunity for us to grow well beyond that. It should be certainly triple. My last institution, I had 2,000 dual enrollment students.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Yep.
With the change in your testing for developmental studies to college ready, what is the success rate in terms of graduation, the system you're using now versus the testing for testing in out developmental studies?
Mhm. VP Bro, do you have some data on that in terms of the difference? I think you gave a statistic in terms of moving away from, if that was the question, moving away from AccuPlacer and others and moving in multiple measures type testing and the success that we've had regarding the move to multiple measures, which many of the other two-year schools are also moving towards that.
What I'm asking is, what's the graduation rate now?
Yes, sir. So right now, we introduced the policy in the spring of 2021. So we are seeing course completion increase, right? So we do have some performance, and that's also noted as part of our narrative in the performance accountability report to the state. So right now, we're just seeing course completion success rates. And I think to your question, how does that impact persistence from semester to semester, retention year to year, and then graduation? So we should see the numbers for graduation in 2023, 2024, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Dr. McCurdy, Ms. Burrell, and Mr. Hardy for your information for Baltimore City Community College. And as I promised several minutes ago, that I will make up for the time. So.
Thank you all. Thank you, Secretary Fielder. Thank you, commissioners, as well.
Thank you. So Debbie, we're going to move through these slides quickly. The regional higher education centers in Maryland, next slide please, are centers that have more than one higher education institution participating in providing a variety of programs in the centers. So it's not a branch campus, it's a multi institutional entity. Next slide, please. And they're designed to provide access to affordable higher education programs to citizens in unserved or underserved areas of the state, and respond to the needs of businesses and industries in the area in which they serve, and encourage participation by institutions of higher education for the benefit of the students. Next slide, please. There are 7 regional higher education centers in the state. 4 receive funding from MHEC. That would be Anne Arundel Community College at Arundel Mills, Eastern Shore Regional Higher Education Center, the Laurel College Center, and the Waldorf Center for Higher Education, which may be taking an interesting twist soon. But there are 3 University System of Maryland centers: the University System of Maryland at Hagerstown, universities at Shady Grove, and the University System of Maryland at Southern Maryland. Most recently, the Waldorf Center has been named the universities at La Plata when they moved to La Plata. So we'll have to have a conversation with the University System of Maryland to see if they want to change the governance of that center. Next slide, please. And you can see the breakdown of what I just said about the 7 centers in the state. Next slide. The funding strategy for these regional higher education consists of base allocation of $200,000 for each center, incentive funding, which for the target full-time equivalent student population, which would be the 2+2 lower division and the upper division and graduate enrollments at the center. Lease funding for centers with lease space that have not received state capital funding support, and special funding for one-time projects or startup costs. And then the final slide is the fiscal 2023 allocation to the 4 centers outside of the university system of Maryland. You can see they had $1.4 million, and that was composed of $800 million in base allocation funding and $800,000 in base allocation funding and almost $610,000 in incentive funding. And we would expect that trend to continue for fiscal 2024. Each of the 4 centers has provided a 2-page information piece on their respective centers. If you want those, we'll make sure you get them, as well as the presentations that you heard today through our meeting. Are there any questions? Okay. Well, I did make it in time. So we're back on track, and we have a scheduled break from 12:45 to 1:15, and then we do need a quorum for the afternoon session because they are all action items for the commission. So I'll turn it over to Vice Chair McDaniels to take the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman, for so efficiently leading us through that, all those presentations. And we will go to our break. And as Jeff said, we want to start up with a quorum at 1:15. So we're on break right now till 1:15. And then I'm going to do the committee updates. I skipped over that this morning. And then we'll get into those items that we have to approve from the Department of Finance and Administration. So we'll meet back up at 1:15 promptly. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Hey, Jeff, what's the countdown?
I'm sorry?
What's the countdown? How many more minutes?
I think it's about time. I think we
Oh.
may have a
Hey,
quorum.
you're running one heck of a meeting, sir.
Jeff's doing all the work.
Well, that's part of delegation, isn't it?
Yeah, I
I'm
guess.
sort of like Santa Claus. I work hard once a year.
All right, all right. It looks
Mr.
like-
Chair, yes, it does appear we have a quorum now.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. And thanks, everybody, for jumping back in. We just have a few items to get through for the balance of the meeting. I did want to give the committees a chance to update the group on the status of things. So I was going to start with the Education Policy Committee. And Commissioner Boyd, is there any update today?
No, there's no updates. This has been an unusually or atypical slow period for the Education Policy Committee. So I guess we should enjoy it while it lasts because there's probably tons of stuff waiting for us very shortly.
All right. Well, thanks for that information. Commissioner Coleman, anything from the Outreach Grants and Financial Assistance Group? You're still on mute. Yep.
I'm sorry about that. We met last week and we met all the directors of the grant, the communication, and the program committee. And what I just want to give you a brief overview of what was discussed and what's going on in these different areas. Al Dorset, which is joining us today, is the director of the grants. No, yeah, of the outreach division. And what he's doing, he's participating in the upcoming Maryland Public Television broadcast, right? And also it is tonight at 7 p.m. And he will be discussing the different ways to pay for college. Al will be the live guest, promoting all of the scholarships and grant MHEC administer monthly. Our new commissioner, Nicole Sade Davis, and also Rhonda Wardlow, which is the communication director, will be meeting separately to work on Hispanic outreach opportunities in the upcoming week for National Hispanic Heritage Month. The two to promote MHEC scholarship opportunities through financial aid. We also look forward to working in the future with local organizations and schools to promote the financial aid program and other assistance that they can give to the students. Priscilla Moore, which is in the grant unit, is extremely busy with the office currently administrating approximately $31 million in funding for the grant program. And Kendall Clark, the outreach coordinator, confirmed 9 upcoming events he will be attending to promote the different aids that the state provide for students. And I just also want to say that the grant, the outreach, the grant, and the communication staff is very excited. They have a lot of energy, and it's not like they're working very hard too. So I think we should appreciate that we have that type of staff that's working and representing the commission. Thank you.
Right. That sounds like some good work going on. So thank you for that report. And Mr. Newman, how about the Finance and Operations Committee? Anything to report today?
Sure. As Secretary Fielder mentioned early in the meeting, that we continue to fill vacancies. We're filling the vacancies for the new academic program review unit, and we're backfilling vacancies that are occurring in other parts of academic affairs as people are moving over to the new unit. And we've also been working on filling vacancies in the Office of Student Financial Assistance with our new director's oversight and helping restructure the office a little bit to make it a little more efficient. And we've, under our Director of Finance and Administration, we've closed out fiscal year 2022. We've opened up fiscal year 2023, and we're now getting ready to go talk to DBM about fiscal year 2024. So that's what's happening.
All right. Well, thanks for that update. And from, were there any questions for Mr. Newman or? Okay. As far as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, we're very excited because we've recently extended invitations to campus DEI directors to meet with us in a couple weeks. And that was actually suggested by Bryson Barksdale, who's one of the staff members of our committee. And it's an educational effort, and we're going to kind of assess what's going on currently and see how MHEC can better support these DEI efforts at the various institutions. So we're excited about that development. And we've also received the 2022 cultural and diversity reports from various institutions, and our committee will be reviewing that information and trying to make some suggestions for improvement in the future. So we will be meeting in the month of October, and I'll keep the rest of the group updated with that. So I think that's all from our various committees. And at this time, I'll turn it back to Mr. Newman, who again will guide us through the remaining items that we have to cover today. 3 of the 5 items we've seen before, and we have 2 new items, I believe, right, Mr. Newman, to cover today.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just want to take a moment to introduce to you our new director of the Office of Financial Assistance, Al Dorsett. Al comes to us with over 28 years in financial aid experience at institutions in New Jersey and Delaware. Most recently, he was the executive director of the Office of Financial Aid at Delaware State University for the past 4 years. And he's actually come in, and there's a lot to learn, and he's been working very hard to learn it. But he also comes in with a base, a foundation of knowledge in the financial aid area, and we're very excited to have him here. And we also have Jennifer Katz, our principal counsel, to assist Al as he walks through the next 5 agenda items. Al?
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. So I'll start with the first agenda item, which is the final adoption of amendments to COMAR 13B 08 01 02, which is the 2+2 transfer scholarship program. On June 22nd, 2022, the Commission approved proposed amendments to the regulations for the 2+2 transfer scholarship program, which provides financial assistance to encourage community college graduates to transfer to 4-year institutions of higher education and complete a bachelor's degree program. The purpose of the amendments is to remove the use of the federally calculated family contribution, EFC, as a measure of financial need for the scholarship. So it is recommended that the Commission approves for final adoption and close amendments to the regulations for the 2+2 transfer scholarship program.
I so move.
Commissioner McDaniels, I think you're muted.
Mute.
Sorry about that. Commissioner Coleman moved, and I believe Commissioner Sellinger seconded. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any discussion or questions about the motion? All right. If not, all in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? Any abstentions? All right, that motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Dorsett.
Thank you. Moving along, we have the final adoption of amendments to Comar 13B 081303, which is the Edward T. and Mary A. Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program and Jean B. Cryer Memorial Scholarship Program. On June 22nd, 2022, the Commission approved proposed amendments to the regulations for the Edward T. and Mary Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program and Jean B. Cryer Memorial Scholarship Program, which provides financial assistance to certain veterans, for responders, local public safety employees and their families, and to families of school employees who died and were disabled as a result of the act of violence, respectively. The purpose of the amendments is to expand eligibility for the program to students who attend private career schools. It is recommended that the Commission approves the final adoption of the enclosed amendments to the regulations for the Edward T. and Mary A. Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program and G.B. Cryer Memorial Scholarship Program.
Thank you. At this time, I'd ask for a motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. And I heard a second. Who was the second? And Commissioner Salmon. Okay, it's been moved and second. Any discussion? Any questions or discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dorsett.
Thank you. Moving on to our third item. On June 22nd, 2022, the Commission approved proposed amendments to the regulations for the Workforce Shortage Student Assistant Grant Program, which provides financial assistance to students in certain majors who agree to use their degree to obtain employment in fields of critical shortage in the state after graduation. The purpose of the amendments is to provide a specific process for students who obtained their GED but have not yet enrolled in college or university to apply for the scholarship and to adjust related procedures for administering the scholarship. It is recommended that the Commission approves the final adoption of the enclosed amendments to the regulations for the Workforce Shortage Student Assistant Grant Program.
Thank you,
Commissioner Boyd, I so approve.
It's been moved by Commissioner Boyd. Is there a second? Commissioner Coleman seconds. Thank you very much. Any discussion? It's been moved in second. Any discussion further? All right, thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Any objections? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Dorsett.
Thank you. Moving on to the fourth item.
This is a new item, correct?
Yes, this is approval of proposed amendments to Comar 13B 0820 Cyber Security Public Service Scholarship Program. Under the 18-3501 of the Education Article, Annotated Code of Maryland, the Cybersecurity Public Service Program supports students who are pursuing an education in programs that are directly relevant to cybersecurity. In 2021, the state amended the Cybersecurity Public Service Program to allow part-time students to be eligible for support from the program, in addition to changes regarding eligible employers for the mandatory service obligation. The proposed regulatory amendments reflect the changes to the Cybersecurity Public Service Program to allow for part-time students as described, along with amendments designed to streamline the renewal process and to limit basis for deferment of service obligation. These amendments have been approved for legality by MHEC Assistant Attorneys General as required by the Maryland Administrative Procedure Act. Upon your approval, proposed regulations and regulatory amendments will be submitted to Legislative Joint Committee on Administrative, Executive, and Legislation Review, after which they are submitted to the Division of State Documents, DSD, for publication in the Maryland Register. It is recommended that the Commission, 1, approves for publication in the Maryland Register the enclosed or the proposed regulatory amendments to the Cybersecurity Public Service Scholarship Program, and 2, authorizes its Assistant Attorney General to make non-substantial edits to the proposed regulations to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD.
Thank you. Before our motion is made, are there any questions, since this is the first time we've seen this? Are there any questions about the item, or anybody need any further?
Yes, I'm not sure if you can hear me. It's Commissioner Williams. I'm on the phone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, great, thanks. And thanks for raising the opportunity for questions. It's the first time it's coming. Could you remind us, what is the estimate of people, students, that this change would affect and open up the scholarship for through the proposed regulations?
So, Jeff, Mr. Newman, do you want to assist me with that? Because I didn't have any numbers on the estimate.
I think we're going to have to do a little bit of digging and get back to you on that.
Okay. I mean, if they passed a bill in 21, potentially DLS might have done an estimate in the legislation.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look at the fiscal note and see what they had. And
Okay.
We'll email that out to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Is there a motion to move the item forward as recommended?
I so move.
Who was that?
Commissioner
Salmon? Okay.
Second.
Is that Commissioner Howe? Okay, it's been moved and second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of moving the item forward, please raise your hand or say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you.
And our last item is approval of proposed new regulations for Comar Veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq Conflict Scholarship Program. Under 18604 of the Education Article and the State Code of Maryland, the Veterans of the Afghanistan and Iraq Conflict Scholarship Program provides financial assistance to military service members, veterans, reservists, and their family members. The scholarship is available to individuals enrolled in or accepted to bachelor's degree, associate's degree, and 2-year certificate programs at community colleges, public senior 4-year higher education institutions, and private nonprofit institutions of higher education. The annual award may cover up to the amount equivalent to 50% of tuition, fees, and room and board, and of a resident of undergraduate of a public 4-year institution. The proposed regulations have been approved for legality by MHEC's Assistant Attorney General as required by Maryland's Administrative Procedure Act. It is recommended that the Commission, 1, approves for publication in the Maryland Register the proposed new regulations for the Veterans in Afghanistan Iraq Conflict Scholarship Program, and 2, authorizes its Assistant Attorneys General to make non-substantive edits to the proposed regulations to conform to the stylistic and formatting requirements of AELR and DSD.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsett. Again, before we move anything, does anybody want to ask any questions or get more information about this particular item? Secretary Fielder? You're still on mute also.
You would think I know how to do that by now. Anyway, Alan, I think, Jennifer, the use of the actual terminology was or family members. Is that inclusive of stepchildren?
Yes, and I apologize, I missed that one. It is expanded eligibility for members, including stepchildren, in addition to children and spouses.
Yeah, oh, that's good, because we had that issue come up in the last 6 months with a veteran who was declined because the previous language did not include stepchildren. And so this is an amendment that corrects that. And that was legislatively passed that excluded the children. And another one of our scholarship programs, the legislature had previously amended to include stepchildren, but didn't on this one. The other part is this one may be known also as Doug Peters, because Doug was a primary person we worked with on this. He was a former senator, and there wasn't a bill to name it for him, so we're using language may be known as.
Mhm.
All right.
Interesting.
Commissioner Coleman, did you have a question or not? No, okay. All right. Any other questions on this item? Okay, if not, is there a motion to move this item forward? Commissioner Howe moves. Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Salmon seconds. All right. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Any objections? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Dorsett. I think is that all? That's all five, correct?
Yes, that is it for me. Thank you.
Nice to have you join us this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Mr. Newman, for the items?
I believe so. Thank you all very much for your attention today. It's a long meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Our next commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 26th at 1 p.m. I don't think we've had any. Our chair was talking about revisiting in-person meetings, but I don't think we've gotten very far with that. So I think it'll certainly be in a virtual one in October at least.
Okay.
Secretary, do you know any more about the in-person meetings or?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair, I think you've done a great job running this meeting today, very smooth, keeping us moving. Secondly, what we'll do is Debbie Ng will send out a kind of a Google or whatever they call the survey, monkey survey, to see what people feel. I know talking privately with some commissioners, there's some concern about returning to in-person, so I just want to provide options. The MSDE, actually, it was a Maryland Longitudinal Data Study group, was trying to hold a hybrid, which was those who were in person and those that were online, and it was terrible. It was like the old time seance. You couldn't hear, you couldn't see, and you know, it wasn't effective for this group because everybody is so involved. So we'll have to review the technology before we switch back to trying to do hybrid. So it would be a mix. So I think we'll send that survey out shortly.
All right. Thank you, Secretary. Does anyone else have anything for the good of the group today?
The only thing I would add is I really appreciated the people who were able to show up for the O's game and bring home a win. We had a good evening and a lot of fun, a lot of good discussion. And I've got a couple requests for, okay, what are we doing to get the Ravens? Not sure I can get that. I'll work on it.
All right. Yes, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Get to a call.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would ask for a motion to adjourn if no one. So it's moved by Commissioner Coleman. Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. All right. That's it for today. Thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, indeed.